Hello? If everybody could get seated. There we go, that's fine. If everyone could take your seat.
I'm holding mine safe.
I'm going to start calling, I will call people out by name. I've done it before.
Just bang your gavel a couple times. That'll get their attention.
That's true. That's true. You want me to do that?
Yeah, that's what it's there for.
Okay. Since I couldn't get my mic turned on. Yes, it is. No, this is the part where my mic wasn't loud enough and someone said, bang the gavel. I'm like, okay. So I'm going to call the meeting back to order as people are reconnoitering to their seats. I don't think that's the right word, but okay. We left off on Article 7. We're going to continue. We do have the chairman's going to join us at some point. We'll take a break when he arrives to hear some remarks. After Article 7, we're going to jump to Article 11 because Bob DeBrow has to head out early. So we don't want to not have opportunity to talk about it. And then we will come back to Article 8, just to give you a flow. And I'm looking, I guess I don't have an agenda today. So we're just going to go with it. No agendas for me. Oh, there's one.
Well, here's yours. We didn't revise it.
Oh, that's okay. Never mind. It's all good. Okay, so I've slept since then. But I think we all remember Article 7, which is new and modified infrastructure to be broadband ready. Were there comments to this article?
There was a question pending at the end of the day that you were researching.
The question pending at the end of the day that I was researching.
Which was the issue about the minimum network specification notice and did the license in Section 1, excuse me, did the license in Section 1, which you seem to need to have as prerequisite to build new infrastructure, does that in combination with the minimum network specification notice or otherwise compel you to build at least a 25 megabit service and therefore bar you from building a 24 megabit
Right.
or otherwise service?
Right, thank you. By my reading, the answer is no, but I don't actually think it's that clear. Mm-hmm. It doesn't say that it has to be broadband ready, which implies 25.3, but the fact is the only place that my understanding is within the code that failure to do broadband has an impact, and broadband being defined as 25.3, is for funding. So this was not intended, I don't believe, Kelly, you can tell me if this is incorrect, but I do not believe that this provision was intended to require the deployment of broadband in order to get this notice, this approval. The MNSN approval was not intended to limit it to broadband.
I mean, maybe more generally, what is the capital L license in the third line there? What is this? I mean, if I don't need a license to build infrastructure today, why do I have to get a license? And how is a license requirement accelerating broadband rather than erecting another barrier?
Let's look at. Okay, so in this context, the license means the documented terms of approval of civil works by any competent authority which regulates or otherwise controls the carrying out of those civil works. So the license in this case is permission to build.
And why do we want to erect a requirement to get a license to build infrastructure if we're trying to encourage more infrastructure to be built? Why do we want to erect additional prerequisites? Don't we want to remove barriers, not create barriers?
I think that this was not intended to create a new barrier, but if you were going into any community to build, you would have to get a permit of some kind.
Right.
I think this is intended to clarify the type of permit you get and to actually streamline the process of getting a permit, as opposed to creating a new thing on top of the permit that you would already have to have in order to build. Because this is all about new construction. This is not about retrofitting existing construction.
So if I want to build 25 small cells in a city, do I get one license, or do I get 25 small cell permits, or do I have to get a license and 25 small cell permits?
I'm going,
So,
Okay, so that.
no,
that's an-
wait, I don't think that, okay, he says yes, but I don't know that, I actually don't think that's addressed. I don't think that it's clear from, okay, if you're building poles or towers in a municipality, you have to get a permit to build those.
Already, that's the status quo.
Status quo.
Okay.
This is just saying, I believe, that this, hold on one second. I think we need to maybe clarify the language, but it's my understanding that this is an all-inclusive step. That if you are building new construction, that it would be the equivalent in my industry of saying, I'm going to build a tower and I'm going to put an array on top of it. I think that that's basically what this was intended to do, is sort of have in this case, the broadband manager streamline that process, so you're not going over here to get a permit and going over there to get the rest of it. It's intended to put it into one bucket.
Well, I mean, my sense in reading this is that the broadband manager, I don't think it's a manager. I mean, I don't think in California the manager is going to be a one-man shop, right? I mean, that's going to be like a 100-man agency. But I'm like on 6.4 here, prevention of civil works, which seems anathema to what we're trying to do here. We're trying not to prevent civil works, but here, you've got this issue about, in the opinion of the manager, if there's already sufficient spare or appropriate communications network capacity. So I have to, in order to build infrastructure, I have to get a license, and then I have to mother may I with the new state bureaucrat that we created, and I guess I have to pay for, and staff, and be subject to his civil penalties and subpoenas and whatnot. I have to get his permission to build if, in his view, there's not already sufficient spare capacity. And I don't know if that's capacity on my network or capacity on the industry's network.
No, it's capacity. Okay. This was requested by Crown Castle, this language, and it has to do with existing, yes, this is part of one of your changes,
Ken, what are you
my
doing,
friend.
buddy?
And I'm not to call people out, but we do got to move. So basically, this was requested because there are already existing vertical assets. This has to do with new construction, not capacity on your own network, but you're asking to build a new facility upon which to place a small cell. If there's already a facility there that you can go on and there's capacity on that facility, then the manager can say, you know what, instead of building yet another thing and making the right-of-way look like a porcupine, we're going to ask you to go up on this thing that's already there.
There's nothing in here that reads like that.
That's what it says. In the transparent and non-discriminatory opinion of the manager, there is already sufficient spare and appropriate communications and network capacity, you're right, it says capacity, available to the applicant as evidenced by the NSIR.
But there's nothing that says communications network capacity means tower and not
Well, it doesn't.
fiber or fiber multiplexers, or there's nothing that limits it to towers or.
Okay, well, here's where we are, I think, because I
Okay.
think you're making some good points about this, but I will say that this article is unchanged. So I think what we need to do, did you want to say something, Karen?
I just wanted to get clarification on Chris's question. Is he asking whether or not you need a license to put up an attachment?
Well, I'm just trying to understand.
Like, I'm just trying to get to the bottom of.
I'm just trying to understand what this thing does, because it just looks like a disaster. It just looks like we're creating a bureaucracy and a bunch of additional permits and a bunch of, judgmental, arbitrary decisions by some new state bureaucrat who's going to decide what we can build. It's not even clear to me what it is I can do. It's not clear that this applies to just macro towers, or this applies to small cells, this apply to fiber backhaul, or, what is the scope of things for which I have to get a license in the arbitrary,
Okay.
discretion of the manager.
So here's this, I'm sorry, this entire provision starts with where the creation of new infrastructure or the modification of existing infrastructure by or on behalf of any network support infrastructure owner amounts to civil works. I'm assuming civil works is a defined term. So this only applies in the context when this is a civil work. Of course, sorry.
I may have missed this yesterday when I had to step out for a while, but there don't seem to be any changes from the harmonization committee, so why are we reopening
Yeah, I was
the
about
debate?
to go there.
That's my question.
Now I'm about-
We're
yeah.
relitigating this
Well-
article.
Well, hold on, we're not, okay, first of all, not exactly, he's asking for clarification. Let me
Right.
read one more thing, and then I'm going to go exactly where I think you guys are going, which is this. The civil works, Chris,
Right.
is any building or engineering works which, taken as a whole, with other related works, are sufficiently material to require a license. In other words, if
but-
you have to have a permit, it's only in those
That's
cases.
a circularity, right? I'm asking when I have to have a license. You're saying when it's a civil works, and a civil works is defined as a undertaking that requires a license. It's a
Presumably,
circularity.
this community that you're moving into knows when you have to have a building permit.
But that's the status quo. I already have to get a building permit. I already have a small cell.
Okay.
This is saying that when I come in, I need to get a license to do this work if, in the opinion of the manager, it's okay for me to build new infrastructure. And I'm saying, when do I need a license? You're saying when it's civil works. The definition of civil works says it's a civil works project if it requires a license. That's a circularity.
Gotcha. Okay, here's what I would like to suggest. The chairman is here, so I would like you to, basically where we are procedurally is this has been voted out of harmonization without changes. If you would like to propose a friendly amendment to it, I suggest that that's what you do. Otherwise, you're on the record and we need to do a vote. But first, we're going to hear from the
Let's.
chairman. I would like to welcome, where are you? There you are. Hi. I would like to welcome Chairman Ajit Pai, who, I don't know where you're sitting. Oh, here. Where are you? Thank you.
I'm so used to applause just breaking out when I walk into a room. So just kidding. It's a nice change of pace. So, good morning to you all. Thanks so much for being here. It's great to be with you. And as always, my main message for this group is thank you. Thank you for all the work you've put in over the last 18 months. What you do for the BDAC is truly a public service. And I'm personally grateful to you for that. Lest you think my praise for the BDAC is simply pandering to the room, which it is, of course, but nonetheless, you should know that your ears must have been burning on Monday. And that's because on Monday, I was in Panama for the annual meeting of the Caribbean Association of National Telecommunications Organizations, or CANTO, as it is called. El Canto, technically, which is Spanish for the Canto. Now, at these types of gatherings, we often discuss common challenges and share best practices from our respective countries. And during one of the sessions I was participating in, I was asked to discuss strategies and tactics that we are using here at the FCC in order to solve the problems of broadband deployment and advance ideas that others might consider using as well. And I specifically mentioned the BDAC. I stress the value of bringing in external expertise from both an outside perspective and a first-hand perspective. And I was interested to hear from counterparts all the way from Anguilla to Trinidad that they were very interested in some of these initiatives and the very process that we were using to gain input from all of you, from experts on the outside. And I think the timing of this example was particularly apt. As you know, at the next week we're voting at the Commission meeting on a major policy proposal that was driven by your labors. And that is, of course, the proposal known as OTMR across the country. One Touch Make Ready, of course, which OTMR doesn't exactly trip off the tongue. But nonetheless, One Touch Make Ready is one of those concepts that has been talked about a lot, but there has not been much action on the federal level. And this committee changed that. You put in the hard work to figure out how to craft a detailed federal One Touch Make Ready policy. You built momentum for action, and 6 days later, I'm optimistic that we will see a positive vote to adopt this policy. By making it quicker and cheaper to attach to poles, we can accelerate network build-out and make it easier for new entrants to provide more broadband competition, something that I was inspired by a few years ago when I had a chance to visit Detroit, where a certain Mark Hudson showed me around and identified some of the barriers that small entrants were having in terms of gaining access to poles and conduits and rights of way. So thank you for the hospitality many years ago. According to one estimate in the public record, this policy change could unleash some $12.6 billion in additional fiber installation expenditures. And this ultimately means a lot more people who will enjoy much faster internet access service, people who will be, for the first time perhaps, on the right side of the digital divide. That's not bad for government advisory committee work, so congratulations on that. Of course, there is always more to be done, and I firmly believe that you can do it. For over the last 18 months, you have fully ignored one of the cardinal rules of the lazy, which is that incompetence is a strong defense to responsibility. That was supposed to be a joke, but anyway, I always use that with my wife anyway. Like, why can't you do this? Like, hey, look, incompetence is the best defense to responsibility. It's like, hey, if I wasn't so bad at it, you wouldn't give me this responsibility. Anyway, you, by contrast, have proven remarkably competent at handling these challenging issues. And so today, I'm pleased to announce that we are giving the BDAC a new charge. And this charge is timely, and it will matter to millions of people across the country. Specifically, we will ask the BDAC to form a new working group to study policies for helping make broadband infrastructure more resilient in times of disaster. This is a three-phase challenge. First, we need to make sure that our networks are better prepared in advance to withstand disasters. Second, we need to minimize the downtime for networks during a storm. And third, we need to develop strategies for quickly rebuilding networks after a storm has passed. Now, last year's historic hurricane season should make clear the gravity of this assignment. It certainly does for me, having spent time in Houston in the wake of Hurricane Harvey, in Florida in the wake of Hurricane Irma, and in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands in the wake of both Hurricanes Irma and Maria. Additionally, some of the news coming out of California today reminds us, the wildfires around Shasta Lake, that this is a critical issue, that people need to be able to communicate when a disaster strikes. Now, this year alone, we've already had 2 hurricanes, Beryl and Chris, which is the earliest we've had 2 hurricanes in more than a decade. And so I believe that a good use of the remaining time in the BDAC's charter, I guess, will be to focus on how we can ensure that broadband infrastructure can withstand different types of disasters. So I'm excited about this mission. As I said, it really matters. And I do hope that you're energized as well to tackle this extremely important task. In the near future, we will solicit membership for this working group. We will aim for a vote on recommendations in February of 2019, right after the Chiefs win the Super Bowl. Now I know that you have been rely on an objective observer, Andy Huckabee, to assess that prediction. Now, I know you've been through a lot over the last day and a half, and certainly over the last 18 months, but I hope that you will draw inspiration from our shared cultural patrimony. And specifically, as I'm sure you are aware, tomorrow is the 40th anniversary of the release of one of the most thoughtful philosophical films of all time, Animal House. And one of the scenes in that movie reflects well, I think, some of our work here, but it comes near the end of the movie. Bluto Blutarski asks why his fellow fraternity buddies are just lying around and letting Dean Warmer's, his administration stand when he put them on double secret probation. D-Day tells Bluto, "War's over, man. Warmer dropped the big one." And Bluto delivers a stirring speech to rally the troops. I'm sure you remember this. What? Over? Did you say over? Nothing is over until we decide it is. Was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? Hell no. As you probably remember, Otto queries Boone, Germans? And Boone replies, forget it, he's rolling. So anyway, the Delta House rallies to win the day. And the point of this passage is, actually, I'm not quite sure what it is, but I just have never used it in a speech. But the point of the passage is that we're saying the BDAC isn't over until we decide it is. But more seriously, like Bluto and the other Deltas, this committee has consistently risen to the challenge, even when what was being asked of you could seem overwhelming. And so I can't thank you enough for your work on behalf of this agency, on behalf of the American people. And I know it hasn't always been easy, but nonetheless, the results of your labors are proving themselves across the country each and every day, and certainly will in the time to come. So thank you for accommodating me. Sorry to intrude upon your sober deliberations with my not-so-funny remarks, but nonetheless, again, express my gratitude to all of you for the work and for the hospitality. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Pai. We appreciate your remarks. And
say that to all the chairmen.
yeah, that's what I do. Now. Yes.
Yes, in the,
Yeah, the cup is for real.
in the interest of keeping things moving, make a friendly amendment regarding Article 7. Section 3 relies on Article 3, which was voted down yesterday, so I would move to delete Section 3. We would say relies on Article 3. The NSIR is Article 3, so likewise, I'd propose to delete Section 6 as well.
To be clear, Chris, you're proposing Section 3 and Section 6 to be removed?
Yeah, and he's proposing that because both of those two sections refer specifically to the NSIR, which is no longer among us.
Right.
A casualty of the last meeting. I also want to look up one thing really quickly. Okay, and this is, maybe we don't want to get in this, if that resolves your problem, we can stop. I was actually looking up what a civil work is outside of the context of this, and it's relating to roads, streets, bridges, utilities, water supply projects, water plants, water distribution and wastewater conveyance facilities, desalination docks, in other words, basically large infrastructure projects. So I don't know what would...
Yeah, I don't really know what that has to do with broadband.
I don't know what that would, I don't know what it would take to elevate a broadband project up to a civil work.
Right. I think the article is fatally flawed and fatally vague, but in the interest of progressing along here, I think taking out the two sections that rely on the section that we voted down yesterday would at least be an improvement, and in the interest of moving things along, I'd make that friendly amendment.
Thank you. Does anyone have something to say about removing Section 3 and 6 out of this? Okay, then I'm going to ask for a motion to approve Article 7.
We're going to vote on his,
But we don't have to, nobody opposes it.
okay.
I mean, it's accepted if nobody opposes, so.
I'd like to propose a friendly amendment
Okay.
in this article to Section 9 to include this language. All reasonable expenses incurred by a network support infrastructure owner in compliance with this article shall be reimbursed within 30 days of presentation by the network manager from a fund supported by all communication providers in the state that is administered by the network manager. No obligation shall be imposed on any network support infrastructure owner until the network manager has certified that there are sufficient funds to reimburse such obligation. I share your concern about this article. And I wonder if we are not accidentally creating an unfunded mandate.
I'm worried that we're creating a funded mandate and I'm funding it.
That's what I'm trying to propose.
Right? And,
Yes.
you know, I'm already getting franchises, I'm already paying permits, so I got all that. I'm not seeing any upside in this, and, you know, it's sort of circularity, if you will. If I have to fund the manager and then I get reimbursed from the manager, that's my own money that he's giving back to me.
Well, I think what I'm saying in this proposed amendment is that until we figure out how we're paying for it, no obligation gets put on the network support infrastructure owner.
Right, but doesn't that lead the manager to jack up the assessment to generate the revenue so that he can, you know, pay out these things?
And
I
in
mean,
my
that-
view, the manager doesn't have that authority. That would actually reside at the state legislature.
He shouldn't have that authority. We need to actually get into the
We'll
manager.
get to that in Article
Yeah.
13, but, sure, I take that, you know, not having unfunded mandates as a procedural, you know, improvement.
Okay.
So I support that.
Larry?
David, I had the same thought and the same concern, and I do have fear of the unfunded mandate portion of this, but I thought perhaps something that make that a little more amenable would be to substitute the middle portion where you said from a fund supported by all communication providers in the state to from a state fund that is administered by the network manager. If this is a state code and the state is imposing these on us, let the state fund it and let the state figure out how to pay for it.
I think that's a
I agree with that.
reasonable-
Yes, but I agree with that, but, why not have Google and Facebook paying, right? I mean, why limit the fund to communications providers?
Well, as
Why
you
not
know,
make it
I'm,
like a general sales tax? If it's a state
Yeah.
legislature, right, they can do a general sales tax.
would you rather have it be this way, or would you rather have it be added to, I mean, when we get
I'd rather have the
into,
tax be broader, to have, broaden the base of supporters, so everybody in the ecosystem is contributing.
well, we can lift the language from the broadband fund, because that's how that's written.
The way I understand what Larry said it does is it just creates a state fund, and that's it. It doesn't say who
Right, but
pays
I think it
into
was a fund paid by the communications
No.
provider?
No, his language said that, he's removing that
I'm
entirely and just making it
Right,
a
right.
state
I mean,
fund.
I mean, a
Substitute
fund,
from a state fund.
Right, broadly based.
Right.
is
Yes.
what I would say.
Yeah, I think you're saying the
Broadly
same.
based, so that it goes outside the.
Trying to help you, Chris.
Yeah, no, I'm just, just be clear, so it's not just a tax on the communications providers, but it's more like a general sales tax.
Doug?
Yeah, I'm having trouble thinking that we're going to resolve this without addressing Article 13. I think we have to address Article 13, and
Okay.
these are so intertwined.
So Article 11 doesn't implicate Article 13. I agree with you, and that's actually where I was thinking, why don't we table these next few articles for a minute, go to Article 11 so that Bob can be on his schedule. Where are you? There you are. Bob can be on his schedule, and then we'll go to Article 13, deal with the broadband manager, and then come back.
Okay, makes sense.
All right. Article 11. Sure.
Yesterday afternoon, we were talking about being able, I guess we didn't figure this technology out, how to put up on one of these screens the ability to look at proposed language in real time as it was being typed. I mean, I guess we haven't figured out what federal court has figured out. But all that being said, we're making a lot of changes to the document, and we're saying, okay, read that back, et cetera. Is there going to be some way that we can see a final red line document after we leave today before we fully bless it? I'm just kind of thinking about after our April meeting, I think, Chris, you had said something about what we'd like to do is take the changes we've made and then go back and look at the video of the meeting just to make sure that we've captured all the changes, or someone on that end of the table said that last time. And
We are,
Look at the video.
no, we are, yes, yes, you do. Yeah. We are, we need to put up, in a provision there have been substantial confusing changes, I agree we need to put the language up, but we are going to be voting it out. There will be an opportunity following the meeting to make sure that the changes were accurately incorporated into the document, but we are voting out today.
that's my point. I want you to flesh out what is that opportunity going to be? What does that mean?
You're talking like an errata.
Yeah, an errata.
A minor errata or something, but
Yeah.
it's not a de novo.
Right, a non-substantive, this was a
That's right.
typo, a comma got dropped,
Yeah.
Or
we lost a
reasonable
word.
didn't get put in, or something of that.
Right, but a change that we all agreed to that
Right.
didn't make it in, and that would be, we can talk about at the end how we want to do that, if we
Yeah.
want to assign
Okay.
a committee to do that, or if we want to just, everybody look at it, but somebody's going to have to, be the lead on that, and we'll talk about that later.
Because, and again, just to confirm this, David, you have the document. You're
Yes, he does.
doing the red line on it right now, correct?
Which is scary in and of itself, Kelly.
Right. I'm glad it's you.
Okay, Article 11.
I do, and I'm trying to figure out a way if we could share this document or share the screen.
I was actually just looking at David's laptop to see if he had a report for this particular connection. I didn't see
I have
it.
an HDMI, is what I have.
If they have an HDMI, do they have an adapter, maybe?
I have some emails out. Let me get back to you on that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Jim.
All right, Bob.
Okay, great. Article 11, the first part of Article 11 that starts, not surprisingly, on page 10. I guess you'll have to find it by looking for Article 11. The first part was already voted out. There's two parts to this now. The first part was intended for states today that have voice broadband funds and to convert them to, voice funds to convert them to broadband funds. I was not involved in the creation of that, and that was already voted out. So I'm not going to spend time on that since that's conceivably a moot point. The second part, which starts a few pages later and is in red, is what was added during reconciliation. And essentially what this is, it was kind of an interesting exercise to try and put something in here. What we were attempting to do was create some language that would allow a state that wants to create a broadband fund, give it some guidance. This really differs from the rest of the document in that it's not something that you could pick up and stick into a statute and it would be self-effectuating. And it's not meant to do that. There are more than half the states do not have universal service funds for broadband. And a lot of those states are looking for ways to do it. So I think guidance would be helpful. This is intended more to provide almost a checklist with a little bit of explanation as to how one could go about creating a broadband fund. And it's modeled on broadband funds that currently exist today. Every state that has a broadband fund does it a little bit differently. So this was an attempt to gather the common components, put that in writing, and then put it out there so that it would begin the process in a state that wanted to incorporate a fund, and the process would then involve getting the stakeholders together and figure out how it would make sense to create a broadband fund in that particular state, given the circumstances of that state. So in that sense, this would fit no state, but it would be a starting point for any state that wants it. So with that, I will go through the individual sections. The preamble basically just goes through and states what it is we're trying to do here, and that's basically create a broadband fund and why we need to create a broadband fund. I mean, the notion here is that, but going back to the '96 Act, universal service is defined as a federal-state partnership. The FCC's funds were never intended to really completely close the digital divide, so assistance from the states in most cases, in places that are uneconomic, is probably necessary, and that's for a state to assess. So it does have its own definition, since it really is probably the most modular piece of this, in that it's sort of on a different level than the rest. It defines broadband services, basically trying to tie that back to the FCC, which today is 25 megs down and 3 megs up, but it does have language in there tying it to the FCC so that it can continue to evolve. It defines a broadband service provider, fairly simply. It defines a qualified broadband service provider, an entity that is authorized by the state, so the state would have to figure out how it's going to do that. To get funding, and then it defines served areas as areas that are meeting the FCC standard, and unserved areas as areas that are not meeting the FCC's standard. So those are in the definitions. It creates a broadband grant board, and this could be something that a public service commission could do. There are a number of ways you could do this, and there are a number of ways that states have already done this. So it just says you need some type of oversight and somebody to really sit down and work out the nuts and bolts of this and figure out how the money is collected and how the money is distributed. It then, in Section 3, it creates a broadband deployment fund. And again, as you look at the language, it's language that really sort of prods a state to say, okay, who are you going to go after to fund this? Here's a number of thoughts as to how to do it, but obviously at the end of the day, it's up to the states as to how to do. Section 4 really is the distribution part of it. Once you collect the funds, what are the criteria for distribution? What things should you look at? And what's in here are things that states typically look at. So, we're not trying to break new ground here. We're just trying to gather from the states that are currently doing this. How are the 4.2 says, talks about how the eligible carriers will be selected. Section 4.3 tries to add transparency into the process, make sure things aren't going on, behind closed doors, but make this whole process transparent so anybody eligible or anybody interested in this or anybody paying into this has an opportunity to well, automatically, I would say, knows what's going on. 4.4 talks about how quickly projects should be completed under this, and again, that can be adjusted by individual states. And then 4.5 is designed to make the fund as efficient and effective as possible by not funding duplicate networks in a particular area. And that's basically what we have here. There is a, I guess what I would introduce as a friendly amendment in talking to some other people on the harmonization group, and that goes back in the definitions on 1.4 and 1.5. This was originally written to deal with, to divide the universe up into census blocks. And that's because that's the way the federal fund is doing it. The comments came in, or a comment came in and said, census blocks aren't necessarily the right grid, and a state may want to overlay a different grid in deciding where funding should go and where it shouldn't go. So after census block, the thought was to add or other area as designated by the state. So in other words, you're not stuck with a census block. The state can figure out exactly how it wants to divide up its geography and then fund that appropriately. Because census blocks really don't line up with much in the communications industry. It just happens to be a small grid that the FCC decided to use.
Okay, I have a couple of thoughts that I would put in the category of friendly amendments. The first is that under 1.1, the definition of broadband services, I think we need to conform it with how that's defined in the definitions section.
Mm-hmm. And I think they're fairly similar.
They're similar, but it's leaving out the latency and throughput that applies only in rural areas, and since this is a rural fund, those need to be imported here. And then 1.5, unserved is defined already in the definition as an area that does not have broadband. So I would like to suggest that that be defined as it is in the definitions, and then I would like to talk about the definition of underserved. Because if it is a census block where 10%, where basically what this says is that a census block where 90% of the people don't have broadband would be served, the way this is written, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I believe that the rural group, that was actually 80% that are not, I mean, that it was, if this read where an underserved area means a census block or other designated state area in which a broadband services at minimum speeds of 25.3 are available to only 10% would be accurate, but are not available to 10%.
Yeah, and I think.
No, you're right. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I read it wrong. You're right. You have it right.
Okay,
I have it
okay.
wrong. You're correct. I take it back. But I do think we need to pull unserved and make it its own thing because there is already a definition for that. Unless you think it needs to stay there, that's fine too.
Yeah, I mean, serving as, since this is a model that I think any state is going to go through this with a fine-tooth comb, and what ends up in the state is probably not going to look anything like this. Mm-hmm. It'll just conform to this. I'm not wedded to any specific language in here. I just think it'd be really good to have this out there.
I agree. I agree. And you can forget the second one. I mean,
Okay.
we don't, it's fine. Yes, Chris.
I'm trying to understand how this, the census block and the 10% rule that we're just doing there operates. On the CAF program, they take a census block, which on average has, I believe, 12 houses with 2.5 people in a house, so about 30 people in a census block, 12 houses. Mm-hmm. So if you take 12 houses in a census block, this would say if you, or call it 10 for a round number, so if 9 out of 10 had, or 2 out of 10 if 8 out of 10 had service, we would define that as unserved?
Yeah, and that is how this reads, and I have to say that the distinction between this and where that 90-10 rule came from is that the 90-10 rule was based on a county, not a census block. So moving this to census block causes that problem. Basically, the rule that was discussed in the rural group was 90% of the people, 90% of the time. And so if 10% of the people in a county are not served, the county is underserved, and the 10% of people who do not have service could get funding. So essentially, the funding couldn't come to overbuild the 8 people who have service. It would be there to build the 2 people who don't on that block, the underserved areas.
How would you build a network to pick 2 houses out of a census block and not overbuild the other 8? I mean, that would
I don't
seem-
know that you wouldn't overbuild them, but there wouldn't be funding for you to do it. The funding would only be for the 2,
Right,
not the 8, not the 10,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
right?
right.
Oh, sorry, Brian.
Hit on a couple points that I was going to bring up, and I think you hit that right. I did have some questions, or just with the wording, just in the 4 or 5. And I get what you're getting at, but since most of my members are not ETCs yet, I do have several, or 50 or so, that are in the CAF, and we'll be getting some of this and be ETCs.
Right. And you'll notice this does not go back to the ETC.
Yeah,
This is a
and
state.
I think that
so
was a
it's
good idea.
How the state decides to do it.
And I appreciate this addition, right? I was wondering if we could just kind of reword 4.5 and saying the eligible projects, already ones that get USF or already get this, to say that those projects that already get USF are not ineligible for the state fund. So, because I can kind of read this to say, oh, if you're getting USF, then you're automatically eligible for the state fund. So I just
Right.
don't want that to be the case.
Right.
Right? Just going to say that because you get federal USF does not mean that you're not ineligible to receive state funds for that same area.
Right. I think it says that. I mean,
Yeah.
Maybe if you add the words "shall include but not be limited to" projects.
That would be good.
Where would that be? I mean, because what we're trying to do, though, I mean, that may then make it look like we're also wanting to allow in two networks to being funded in the same place, which is one of the things we're trying to.
Right.
Yeah, and I thought you
Right.
got that in the last sentence, but
Yeah,
maybe that's.
yeah.
So I'm just trying to get cleared between, you're saying if you're getting USF, you can also get, the same carrier can also get the state fund, as opposed to
Right.
carrier A can get the CAF funding, and carrier B can get the state
Yes.
funding, and then the 2 will duplicate in the same area.
I would say, yeah, my take is if someone who is getting USF can still apply for this, but if there is someone there who's not getting USF, then yeah, anyone else can get funds there. If they're not getting 25-3, if they're not
Right.
doing
Right.
25-3.
Right, correct.
If they're getting USF and providing 25-3, are going to because of CAF, then no state funds can come there other than maybe on top of the person who's getting it.
Would it be helpful just to sort of, I mean, to me, it would be say, you know, if a carrier is getting CAF funding in a census block, the state fund shouldn't fund a second carrier in the same census block.
I don't know that I can support that. I would have to think about it.
Be a little too far for me.
I mean, isn't that duplicate? I mean, if you're funding in the same census blocks that only has 12 houses, I mean, that's almost by definition.
Well, that's why I'm opposed to census blocks. I don't.
Well, but hold that thought. But I mean, whether it's where is it and how is it you're going to not be funding 2 different providers in the same area at the same time? And if you're all the way down to a census block of 12 houses and you got one guy funded and you fund another guy in them, how can you not have the 2 of those funded entities on top of each other?
Well, I would like to. Well, okay, that's fine. I would like to propose actually that we move that we default to counties or something else other than
Yeah,
census
I was thinking
blocks.
maybe the easiest way to get around the census block stuff is to take census block out and just leave it as an area designated by the state and let the
That's
state
good.
decide. They can pick a census block, they can pick a county, they can go out with yellow tape and tape out their own area, you know, whatever they want. The census block was just, I think it's too specific of a reference to be in something like this.
The states don't really think in census blocks generally. David, Don.
I'd like to focus for a minute on the contribution side. There were 2 provisions that were in the original language that seem to have been changed. I'm sorry, let me talk into the microphone, I apologize. If I can shift to the contribution side for a minute. There are 2 provisions in the original language that didn't seem to make it into the new language, and I just want to highlight those and see. One is the Original language was focused on communications providers contributing, and the new language is on broadband service providers contributing, and there's actually a separate definition, because broadband, we now know, as we agreed yesterday, has a definition that's higher than communications provider. So we're limiting probably a certain number of contributors who may not be broadband providers, as defined in this bill, in this act, by narrowing it down. So I would recommend we go back to communications provider. I understand.
So you would prefer communications providers versus?
Correct, and they're both, actually, communications provider, I believe, is a defined term, and broadband service provider is not. As used here, broadband, you could say it's a provider of broadband service, which is a defined term. But anyway, I would suggest we go back to the original definition.
Okay, yeah, and actually, I'm sorry, I haven't done this comparison, but
So David Dunn, just so I'm following you.
In the new revised language, we have each broadband service provider shall contribute, I think it's 3.11.
right, communication service.
And originally, it was communication service provider.
And to your point, the other thing missing are the subscription services, which is
Correct.
each provider of communication services and broadband-dependent subscription services.
In this new language, they are as a may, and in the previous language, they were a shall.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's fine with me.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Doug,
Just a quick
oh,
one.
was that it? I'm sorry.
Yeah, those are the 2 points.
Okay, Doug.
When you were mentioning, Elizabeth, in 1.5, the reference to unserved already is defined in the general definitions. Underserved is as well. So I wasn't.
Oh, I didn't see underserved in there. I apologize.
Yeah, so I just wonder whether, I think we have to conform it or determine what we're going to do with that.
I don't believe we want to redefine anything in there. I mean, we went through a lot of work in the definition section to make sure. This is, the underserved definition is repeating it. Underserved means an area in which less than 10% of the persons have access to broadband services. So it actually conforms, but yes, I agree with you that the definitions need to conform.
Okay.
Is there something else?
Nope, thanks.
Okay. Larry.
David Dunn, where is your may specifically?
In the new language,
Yep,
it is in 3.1.
okay.
So if you,
Which may include elements, include a rate element?
or other forms of assessment, so it says that funding of broadband shall be equitable on a non-discriminatory basis on all broadband service providers in their state, or other forms of assessment that capture the entities that financially benefit. So it doesn't say shall be on those entities that capture financial benefit from broadband.
Can we just lift the language from the other section, which refers to subscriber-based services?
The original language, David, was in 1.1 and 1.2 of Article 11, where it says every provider and broadband dependent in the state shall contribute. This one seems to suggest they may, or it's optional.
Okay, this is the language I have, a shall, here, right here. And you're saying make that same language in the next section, in the new section proposed by Bob?
Yes, I was a little confused because 1.1 and 1.2 seemed somewhat redundant, and so I wasn't exactly sure.
There's an error in 1.2. It shouldn't say every provider of communication services. That's 1.1. Every provider of broadband-dependent subscription services is what that should say.
Okay, okay.
It's repeating itself.
Okay, so the first one is communication services, the second one is broadband-dependent subscription services.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have no problem taking those with that fix and putting them in here, just to, since those have been worked through before.
My friendly amendment would be to expand it beyond the subscription-based services, since the biggest beneficiaries in the ecosystem are advertiser-supported. And this is a state law. Why not have essentially a sales tax on the whole ecosystem and have everybody who's benefiting from the system contribute to the system?
Okay, it says broadband, oh, you're right. Well, you know what, I have to say that is a really good point. The only reason that's not in here is because in a previous meeting, we're like, well, how would that be accomplished? It was the will of the Rural Committee, and I believe it was the will of the State Model Code Committee to include advertiser-based services. And I guess maybe it's not our problem to figure out how the state can
Write a law.
assess it. Right, so no, but I mean, there's a lot of ways they can, and I know from my conversations at the state level, at least back home, that there's a will to consider that type of funding stream, and that, you're right, that's the single largest. That is addressed here in Bob's language when he says, other forms of assessments that capture those entities that financially benefit from access to a broadband system that's ubiquitously available. If we added the language including advertiser-based services, that would, yeah. Does anyone, Jamie?
Yeah, I just had one last question. I couldn't tell, going back to the new definitions that were introduced for the states that don't have the funds. Elizabeth, did you strike 1.5 to refer back to the original definitions? Because it defines both unserved and underserved as 10% or more together.
Yeah, I had made that suggestion, that we actually just use the existing definitions and the definitions
Okay,
section.
great. Just want to double check that. Okay. Because bringing those together makes no sense.
Specifically, the note, Jamie, I put in here is just conform with definitions, and then I did that again as well above in
So I think-
1.1. I added that as well, that same note, so we'll make it conform with the definitions.
So I think this 3.1 funding maybe gets broken out into a 3.1 A, B, and C. A being the communication service providers, B being the subscription-based service providers, and C being anybody else who benefits from broadband, including advertiser-based services. Is that?
So Elizabeth, I believe I brought this up as I sat on the rural subcommittee of the Model State Code.
Yeah.
And so again, I'm going to ask this question. How do we, state, not me, but a state, tax Netflix or Amazon Prime? Like, how do we do that?
Well,
and I know you're saying we're just going to leave it up to the state to figure that out, but
well, I actually have an answer. I mean, I don't think it's, well, first of all, I don't know that it's, I can tell a state, right. Some states already do. I don't think I can tell a state how to run their business. If I were running a state, I would do it through a sales tax, or I would do it through some kind of a revenue tax. We've already got state sales tax on online sales, and I don't think it's that big of a deal to require an advertiser. They know where their traffic's coming from. They can look at how many advertisements, impressions were received in the state of Maine, and Maine can bill them accordingly for the advertiser impressions.
So again, I just think that we're just putting in language in this document that legislative bodies are going to just turn their nose up at.
Do you have a suggestion of how we could, I mean, because that's the answer. The answer is it's already being done on other ways. And
Somebody's going to pay, right?
Right.
And what this does is, if you broaden the base, it reduces the burden on those folks in. So if I was talking to a legislator, I'd say this lowers the tax on your in-state communications customers and spreads it more broadly.
And it's more in, more out. I mean, it basically, it gets a lot more money, which enables more provision of services. And I have to say that I'm sympathetic to the argument that advertiser services make billions of dollars on the networks that are having to be built because people want what those services provide. And so, we can argue the philosophical debate on, well, we're driving business to the providers because of this great service we have. But at the end of the day, the cost of getting those services and that broadband out to rural America is everybody's responsibility. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that includes the advertiser-based services and the subscription-based services.
Don't agree, but okay.
Okay.
And again, I mean, this is to lay out sort of a broad array of options to get that conversation going. And that conversation is going to start and end differently in every state. So at the end of the day, the state can decide if they want to take on advertisers, if they don't, and if so, how do they get at the revenue? How do they, I mean, it'll be a discussion that'll go on in every state, and then you'll end up with a fund. You'll either end up with no fund or a fund that's tailored specifically for that state.
Christopher.
So I was trying to think about what Brian was saying, and I'm sympathetic to the goals of what you're trying to accomplish, but there's something about the definitions that confuse me and raise the possibility of a hole. So served area is defined as you have to be A and B. You have to be not a CAF area and not receiving speeds at 25.3. Then unserved and underserved only has defined in terms of B, which is it doesn't get 25.3. So there raises the possibility there will be an area that is both neither served nor unserved or underserved because of the way the definition is written. So I was trying to figure out what this means and figure out what the committee was thinking by structuring it this way, or the people who drafted this. It's something, well, that means something that's CAF designated and has 25-3 service, which I don't know how that happens, but would be neither served nor underserved, unserved, underserved. And what do we do with that? It just seems a funny way to put the definition.
Well, someone can get money for less than 25.3 under
right.
the reverse auction.
If they had,
Yeah.
if they have less than 25
If so here's the thing, like, I'm sorry, the CAF money that's coming currently out is at 10-1.
Yes.
Not the two, not the auction that's going on right now, but the money.
And not the ACAM carriers, which are the rural carriers who've accepted CAF money. They've got a portion that's at 25.3.
But CenturyLink is deploying 10-1 in rural Arkansas,
CenturyLink
okay?
is not
So
in
my
that.
point is, CenturyLink, if they go out with their CAF money and deploy 25.3, they're not going to get overbilled by this fund. But if they go out and deploy a 10-1 network, there is the risk of overbuilding in a CAF-funded area because they built a 10-1 network. If they build a 25.3 network, then they're safe. I mean, it's basically trying to push rural America to 25.3.
Right. Or whatever the FCC.
Or whatever the FCC says is broadband.
Hopefully it'll go up at some point.
But I get all that. The question is the way these things are written, they won't cover the field. I mean, why? So one says it has to be not CAF and 25.3. The other says not 25.3. We've now created a hole, which is things that are CAF and 25.3 will fall in neither one of these definitions. So that raises the question, why not just define it in terms of 25.3? And what is served by having CAF there? And I assume that someone wrote this purposefully, and I just can't figure out what it.
Are you in the
Well,
definition section or
yeah,
section
Yeah,
4?
let me explain that. People who are receiving CAF money, both on the rural and the non-rural side, are getting money from the FCC to build, okay? So what we're trying to do is avoid, if they're on, let's say they're in year X and they're getting close, but they're not there. So we're trying to prevent other people from coming in and getting funding while they're actively sort of moving towards this goal, deciding to fund another provider to then go in and overbuild them. Now, there are areas in CAF especially that are not funded at all, so those are clearly eligible. There are areas that, where the speeds are going to be too low. Those should be eligible unless the incumbent wants to do it. But if there is a government program that's actually funding somebody to a certain level, you don't want to spend money to get another network into an area that's already getting funding. And the reason it's getting funding is because it's not economically viable for even one network to be there. So that's the goal. I think part of the problem is having both the underserved and the unserved definition. I'm not even sure both of those are needed. To me, if you define unserved correctly to also include underserved, it makes it much cleaner and you can get it done. We were just trying to stick with some of the definitions that were in here, and that's what created the unserved and underserved issue.
Yes. Jim?
Maybe I'm being dense. I mean, I look at this and I read unserved, and it says, if 1 out of 10 homes isn't served, is served, then I can't fund that area. So there's 9 homes that we can't fund, even just because one in that area percentage-wise knocked it out. So I'm worried that, the unserved piece is going to be extremely difficult to actually find especially as rural areas are defined as this is. You're narrowing this down to a really, really finite number of people that could potentially get the money if we only go after unserved, and our underserved definition is 10%.
Okay, so, yeah, that's actually how I read it too, and that was why I raised my comment. I think we need to break out unserved and underserved and use the definitions in the definition section
But
because
I'm
they're
reading
clearer.
the definition section right now. That's
But
the problem.
it isn't, okay, well, let me go back to that.
Definition says it's
Because I
underserved.
read it backwards too, and I actually think maybe we need to clarify it, but it's the other way around. It's underserved if less than 90%
The
have service.
definition on page 13.
Underserved means an area in which less than 10% of the people in such area have access to broadband. Oh, you're right, it is backwards.
Correct. No, they wrote it the right way when they rewrote the other section.
Yeah, that
and
section's
then
right.
the original definition is completely hosed.
It got backwards.
So we need to fix, if we're going to refer back to that, we need to fix the original definition that we already voted on, which
Yeah, you're right.
was probably a mess. And it just, it's creating this really, really finite number. And to Chris's point, with CAF and all these other things, plus census blocks, et cetera, this almost becomes unadministrable.
Well, it dropped the do not.
Right.
The definition is supposed to be underserved means an area in which less than 10% of the persons in the area do not have access to broadband. It's a 90% rule, not a 10% rule.
Right.
If 90% of the area, right.
So, and then unserved really is an area that's not underserved.
Correct. Has nothing.
Because, I mean, fundamentally, they're saying it's not served by broadband services. Well, but does that mean if one house gets it, then you're unserved, or is
Okay.
it or zero?
I would like to propose that we take that we move the definition of unserved into a 1.6 in Article whatever, and that we Article 11, and that we take the definition in 1.5 under the definition section and replace the existing incorrect definition in the definition section with this.
Right, because I mean, basically, from what I'm reading, the intent here is
Yeah.
a served area is above 90%, an unserved area is under 90, but what is unserved?
Unserved, according to, and we can.
Unserved means an area that's not served by broadband services.
Period.
That's a 0%.
I don't think we need unserved then, because
You cannot
we don't
meet unserved the way it's written.
Yeah, but we don't need the reference to unserved, because unserved is a subset of underserved.
You know, I'm
agree
fine with that. It was in there because at one time there was a preference for how the fund got distributed.
Well, right now
That
it
is-
says unserved is the only thing that can be used for, and only in rural areas, which is where I'm drawing the distinction, because
I
it
see.
says rural areas are what, 100 people?
No.
Sorry, 100.
300 per square mile.
Okay, so that says right now, if you were to take the definitions, 0 people being served is the only way you can get funding for that area of 300 per square mile. So we need to understand what level beneath underserved is unserved.
No, I just think it's written wrong.
How would you write it?
It's supposed to serve it's supposed to serve the unserved portions of underserved areas.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so it's not supposed to, yeah.
So you don't want to but I mean, to Chris's point, how do you not
You don't want to fund it,
How
well.
do you not overbuild the area, that little area, and then provide a competitive service on top of that, to Chris's point? to
Well, for one
those
thing, we're
two
taking it
houses?
out of the census block. That census
Right.
blocks are removed. It won't end up
Well,
as,
it's interpreted by the state now, right?
Right.
Whatever unit they use, with precincts or census blocks, whatever. But where is it that if, I think the way you mean this to work is that if 9 out of 10 have broadband service and 1 out of 10 doesn't, or say 2 out of 10 don't, that's underserved or unserved, and you're going to fund it. Where is it that that just those 2 houses get counted?
That's what I was asking.
And not the other 8?
That's exactly what I was asking.
That's
yeah.
up to the state. I mean, once you remove census block, it's up to the state to figure out how to do that.
No, but I
What
mean,
the area is.
the principle, which I think it was in the end here about not 4.5, funding not provided to more than one entity. So I took that to mean we're not going to fund overbuilding, but do you mean we're not going to subsidize 2 carriers in the same place, that's bad, but subsidizing a carrier where another carrier's already providing services is good? 25.3, I mean.
it's supposed to work that, right, as long as you're at 25.3. So it's supposed to work that if a carrier has 25.3.
Yeah.
To 90% or more of an area available, obviously not take rate,
Right.
then you don't have funding for that area. But what happens in reality, and I know you know this, is that you'll have and I think in counties, but you'll have a county in which the towns are served, and then when you get outside the towns,
Right.
they're not served.
Right.
And so if the state is looking at counties, and that county represents 90% of the, it doesn't say 90% of the population or 90% of the area. If that county's 90% of the population or 80% of the population of the county, you still want funding in the rest of that county. That's what it's intended to get at. It's intended to say, okay, just because you've got your town served
Right.
doesn't mean your farmers don't need it too.
Right.
So how do we get money to fund the farmers?
Right.
Not to overbuild the provider in the city.
Well, I'm trying to understand how the not overbuilding part is working. So if you've got 8 out of 10 in something, say a quarter of the county, you maybe use quadrants of the county.
Sure.
something smaller than the county, bigger than the census block. So if you've got 80% of a quadrant of a county have 25/3 service, that's unserved, that triggers funding. What in the mechanism here only funds 2 out of 10 and not 10 out of 10?
I mean, I don't know.
Because if I'm the provider and I built in this very marginal area, that's good. But then to have a government-funded competitor come build over top of me is it seems duplicative, which would make the fund bigger than it needs to be.
I'm not sure how you avoid it with the available technologies today.
Well, no, I mean, I'm not saying technology, I'm saying if you fund for 2, then that's cool. But if you fund for 10 out of the 10, just because 2 of the 10 don't have the service, then you're penalizing the people who have gone and done, the areas that they can do. You have a lot of collateral damage. You're damaging the 8 who got service without subsidy if you subsidize all 10 out of 10 when you're really targeting the 2 out of 10.
Well, we also don't have money for that, so I think.
Yeah, they should not be
but
getting.
that's exactly the
Yeah,
issue, and
where
that's why I'm trying to
where
see.
there's broadband service, the funding should not be covering those
Dana
areas
has a
at the
thought
same
to
time.
this. And Larry, sorry.
And Chris, I just might be helpful an example. So I've been running a program like this for the last 5 years, and what I see come in is I see a provider bring a project to me where they describe an area where it's not the 10.
Right.
They bring the project to me that's the 2.
Line extension.
So once we remove the census block from the definition, they're able to define a polygon that meets the standards that we're laying out here. And so we fund for those unserved passings.
Right, and I'm saying, right, so they serve a polygon that might be 100% unserved. That's a no-brainer, but as I'm looking in I'm trying to see, is there a place in the mechanism where it says funding is triggered if 20% are unserved, 8 out of 10 are served, 2 out of 10 are not served, that qualifies to trigger the funding? Can you show me where it says whether funding is for 2 houses or funding is for the 10 houses?
No, because we stayed away from that level of specificity, and I think that was driven by the census block stuff. You take the census block stuff out, and you allow the states to sort of figure that out, with the goal of not funding areas that are funded, and funding and not funding areas where it's above a certain level. So you're getting the funding to the right place.
If there's not a bar on funding stuff that already has 25/3, I think you're getting the funding to the wrong place, because you're funding overbuilding, which is
Right.
to the detriment of funding other unserved areas. You want to target the unserved and not fund overbuilding so that you can get more people hooked up.
Well, and that's why
Larry.
served areas has 25/3 in it. So you're not going to fund served areas.
You're never going to serve, yeah, Larry.
I just want to confirm that your comment much earlier will reconcile the apparent conflict in the preamble and the first 1.1 of the definitions. The preamble says with the preference for speeds of 25, and then the definition actually says that it consists of not less than 25/3. So I think the preamble needs to be reconciled to say 25/3, not preference.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
If you look at the
Yes,
first
that is
sentence of the
correct.
So you
preamble.
just
Right.
take out with the preference.
Yeah, I understand, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it should be parent speeds. We don't even need to put it there because it's defined other places. You can just take it out.
Just think we need to harmonize the harmonization.
Yeah, we can just take it out there because it's defined other places, so broadband services is a defined term. Okay, do we have did you get your concerns addressed? Because I don't feel.
I think I share Chris's concern from a different perspective, but I think the other 8 houses, so to speak, that are being overbuilt are usually in high concentration areas. They're not in the real rural area. So I'd like to see if there was a way that we could resolve that, because I mean, fundamentally, I don't want to stop this for the fact that we are worried about overbuilding. Really, we need to just ignore the high concentration areas of these rural areas, which are usually county seats or do things that are more aggregated or less
Right.
aggregated.
Well, by definition, I'm sorry to cut you off. I didn't mean to do that. By definition of what rural is, I think we did that.
And yeah,
Because rural automatically takes out,
the county seat.
well, it now takes out communities of 20,000 or greater.
Right.
And so any area with a concentration of 300 or more in that particular area and/or a town of greater than 20,000 is not rural by definition, so you're already out of this entire provision once you hit
But I
that.
think the way that this would work, because I did a lot of rural construction, is that you don't get the population perfectly evenly distributed, except like in the farms in Ohio. You tend to get little clusters around the village, where the waterfall was and the railroad depot and that sort of, and you might have like a little subdivision around a lake or something. And if you do a larger geographic area, you'll trigger funding for that area, even if it has 80% funding, under 4.1.5. I win the competition for the grant if I have the lowest cost per house. And so I would petition for the money, and then I would, in an area like, say, 100 homes, and you've got like a 60-home subdivision around the lake and then 40 houses that are really rural, I would get funding for that area, and then I'd go overbuild the subdivision, which would have a very low, around the lake, have a very low cost. And I'm not sure that this sends that this is actually going to bring service to the unserved homes, because I could say I'll serve 60 homes for a very low cost, and essentially use the unserved, very rural areas to qualify me for funding, and then I would win the grant by going and getting the biggest bang for the buck.
But the grant is going to say have defined obligations, and it's going to say you got to fund this area, and you got to fund it to these speeds.
Well, it's just like the way CAF works. You've got to show you have service in the area that you got the money for. And it's like what Dana said, you're drawing a polygon.
Right.
You're not going to get, if I go into her with a project like that, she's going to be like, I don't think so, because you can't serve that town. I'm not going to give you money for that. And either she's going to cut it out and say you don't get that money, or she's going to say redraw your polygon.
But even if I serve all 100, if I've got the 60 homes in the dense subdivision and I've got the other 40 in the rural area, I'm going to have the lowest cost per house, and a lot of my construction is going to be overbuilding. This looks like it's going to lead to a lot of overbuilding.
Well, I mean,
Anytime you fund an unserved area, you can lead to underbuilding. I mean, even if you look at the auction. Overbuilding, excuse me, underbuilding, overbuilding. No, but I mean, even if you look at the auction that's going on now, if somebody gets money in a particular area, they could leverage that money to go overbuild the competitor next door.
I'm not talking about.
I know you can't because.
When we shouldn't be talking about the.
Well, okay, then don't use that one. Use any different other funding source from the federal government. Use RUS funding. If you get RUS funding into a rural area that is adjacent to a big town, and they go in and compete with the competitor who's there, that's sort of the competitive landscape we live in. I mean, I appreciate not funding someone to go overbuild, but if overbuilding is a side effect, that's a good thing because it provides competition in the market, which drives adoption.
I would say it's a bad thing, and because that's why we don't have money to get to the extremely high-cost areas, because we're wasting money on overbuilding.
But
That's
should
the
we-
issue.
should
We
we
don't have enough money to build everything,
But it
and that's
would-
why we need to
Should we
target.
consider prorating, though, or at that rate? Because, I mean, like, at a lesser investment, on areas that you overbuild, but you don't want to miss out the unbuilt, right? So I mean, that's the only way that it comes to mind, other than ignoring areas.
You shouldn't get money, period, for the areas that you're overbuilding. That
Yeah,
should
see,
be, that
that's-
should be a competitive thing.
and this is just for
money
capital costs, it's not like
this is
OpEx or anything.
specifically.
I understand that, but we're ignoring the fact that, like, wireless technologies cover the entire damn area. So, like, let's forget about fiber for a
Not all
second.
my areas.
Not all my areas.
But, broadly speaking,
Not at 25.3.
that's the reality that we're starting to run into, is that, new spectrum's coming out, new technologies are there, you can cover the whole area. Like, I respectfully understand what he's saying, but so to that extent, I don't want to not hit the unserved portions of those areas because of that little subdivision out there. I mean, I'm seeing this right now out in Mississippi working with C-Spire. Dense little area, but it's completely unserved.
But that's why you want the smaller area, so that you're not disqualified from funding by larger populated areas. The census tract actually is the right geography.
Well, I think that, okay, so I have
that
two.
reason.
David had his card up for a minute, so I'll let you go first.
I actually think this is a really good discussion. To make sure I haven't heard any concrete amendments to be made yet, or is there a language amendment to be made? Not yet?
Not yet.
I would like to propose an amendment that I think would help with this particular problem. So, Section 2, the fee leveled on current providers shall not be increased above 2017 assessment. My amendment, especially in light of the conversation we're having right now, is to strike that section.
So
where
you're
it
back
says
to
we're
the,
not-
to the previous section, right?
This is the original language.
Right,
Yes,
okay.
where we restrict the amount of money we're going to put towards this problem. I would strike that section completely. I think the problem that we've articulated for the last 20 minutes is we don't have enough money, and we're trying to broaden the base by bringing in broadband service providers and some of these other things. I think this language, while probably good intention, doesn't meet that goal, especially in light of the conversation we've had.
I mean, working extensively in the CAF ROFR program, it does a very good job of micro-targeting the money. They don't send the money to the extremely high-cost areas because you would very quickly exhaust your budget. They put it on the high-cost areas where you're getting sort of a reasonable bang for the buck. They target it very closely so that you're not funding overbuilding, again, to stretch the budget. I mean, they spent $9 billion, $9 billion with a B, and ran out of money before they fixed everything. I mean, that is the magnitude of this problem. It's been estimated, what, like $50 billion problem.
That's why you need this.
And so we need to be careful that we're only funding the unserved areas. And that's also important to get support, because if the program is tagged as a waste, because it's funding duplicative networks, you're going to lose political support for it.
So does that mean you're supporting my amendment, Chris?
No, I would say the program doesn't have the discipline to target the money to the unserved areas and not spill the money on already served areas. Because of that, putting more money into a program that isn't disciplined in the way it targets the money is a bad idea.
Okay, so this is supposed to be disciplined. It's supposed to go to the unserved portions of underserved areas. If you can show as a provider, as with every other program, that you actually have service in that area at 25.3, then there is no funding for that area. I really don't think it's appropriate to argue in this context about competitive overbuilds and on a competitor's own dime that they get to do because they got money next door. I mean, that happens, and like I said, that's the competitive landscape.
Right.
I completely agree with you that it is a waste of funds to give money to an area that's already served. So I would ask what has to be added to this to make that clear, because in my mind that is clear, that this serves rural areas, which already has its own definition, that it serves unserved and underserved areas, which already has a definition. So I need to know what you would need to add to this to make it clear that the funding is not for overbuilding those areas that already have broadband service as that is defined by this act.
Yeah, there's nothing in the federal program, the Federal Universal Service Program, that goes out and audits and says, okay, I gave you $1 million and I told you to build X to 100 locations. Nobody shows up afterwards and says, but I want to show me how all those dollars moved. So I want to make sure none of them actually escaped and went over here. First of all, you could not audit for something like that.
That's not true. The CAF2 ROFR program is audited to the penny. We have to provide the lat and longitude coordinates of each household that we're providing service to.
And how much money you've spent?
Down to the individual address level.
Right. You audit, I mean, the obligations are there. You have to say you met the obligations. Right. But do they then say, now prove to me that you didn't spend any of that money anyplace else?
You are only funded for the difference. There is no other money, because you're only funded for the difference between what you could rationally invest to serve that high-cost house and what the model cost is. So all you're getting funded for is the delta. So once you've spent the delta to serve that house, there's no other money left over.
Right, but, well, I don't think this is a fruitful discussion at this point.
Okay, it says, grant shall be awarded pursuant to the criteria developed by the board with priority given to projects that seek to leverage grant funds through private investment, serve locations with demonstrated community support, demonstrate the operator's technical managerial capabilities, demonstrate the applicant's necessary financial resources, are most cost-effective and technically efficient in that they propose to serve the highest number of unserved and underserved homes, businesses, and community anchor institutions for the least cost and best level of service. I mean, I think that's pretty much as good as we can get it without micromanaging what's really a state board process. I mean, if you have a way to...
In this discussion, with a lot of the same players, depending on the state, is going to happen before this fund is ever created, designed, deployed. So, I mean, this is really to get the conversation started, and so it's left, I mean, not everything is nailed down intentionally.
I'm sorry, I'm reading that from the new language under 4 Broadband Grant Program, which talks about how the program will be administered. And the key one is 4.1.5.
Elizabeth or David, could we add something that said it is the intent of this article that, and then pick up the concept that Chris and others have been, I don't have the language, I apologize, but just to clarify what the overall intent is, so that the reader of this understands that there would be impacts, for example, based on the size of the area that's being measured. I don't know, Chris, if that makes sense to you, but it seems to me, in the interest of getting this done, I think it's critical that we address this, and I would hate to see a vote that isn't supportive generally, but
Could you put it in the preamble?
maybe.
Yeah, I think that's where it would.
Could, okay, so in the preamble of the new language, and we can conform it to the old one.
The 415, though, when you talk about serve the highest number of unserved and underserved homes, again, the definition of underserved is an area with less than 10%, right? Not underserved homes in this definition is sounding like it's less than 25.3, which is not the definition of underserved. So we need to I'd just strike underserved in that, because you're talking about the unserved portions of underserved areas.
Yeah, I don't think you need underserved.
Correct.
You define unserved, do what you want, and then you're done.
Right. Well, we don't need a definition of unserved, but we don't need underserved in this section.
No, right, what you're saying is correct, because and this might also resolve Chris's problem, proposed to serve the highest number of unserved homes, because by definition, the 10% or 15% of the community that in an underserved community that doesn't have broadband are unserved homes.
Right.
So even though the area is underserved, the homes are unserved.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
So that works. I think that might.
You're going to run out of money in serving this, and so you need to prioritize the money on the unserved first.
Right, which is
Right.
why I was
That's
proposing to put.
I want to strike out any underserved
If you have,
reference there, yeah.
if you have somebody who's at 10-1 and you have somebody who's at 0, this program treats them both the same, and that's not the same. One guy has nothing. One guy can't watch 4K video.
Well, by the way, that's my perception of the entire way CenturyLink spends its CAF money, so not to call out a particular company, but, I mean, they're overbuilding the same areas they've already built, and so I have a problem with that as well. I mean, obviously, the zeros are more important than the 10-1s, but the 10-1s are still important, and we have to get it out everywhere.
Cutoff at 3 or 4.
Yes.
But,
Yeah.
if you're treating people who are at 10 or at 15 as if equivalent to somebody who's on dial-up, I think you should, unless you've got enough money to do the whole thing, right? I think you should go and work on your unserved people first, and then your underserved, and then your extremely high cost, because you're going to run out of money, and if you spend the money upgrading people from 10 or 15 to 25, which is going to be cheaper, and that's the problem. It's going to be cheaper to upgrade than it is to serve, and you're going to bias this towards an upgrade
But
fund
that, I mean,
instead of a.
that's a debate we don't need to solve here.
Right.
That's a debate that goes on the 8th floor here between two of the commissioners, and they're on opposite sides of that. So, so you could get one commissioner to agree and one commissioner to disagree with you. So, I mean, I don't think the
But
point
in
is
this
to
provision,
decide all
that's a
this
debate
stuff.
that happens in
Yeah.
the State House. Dana, you're,
Well, originally, I thought what I heard Chris's concern is that this money, we were using the term unserved and underserved, which are defined as areas, not homes.
Yes.
And I think what you were originally saying is you want to make sure these dollars only go to homes that don't meet the FCC's definition of broadband. But now, then you started to go prioritizing beyond that.
Right,
and then
because-
we use a scoring criteria that those homes that start with the least and go to the most, there's some
Right.
weight given
Right.
to that,
Right.
so that we're drawing in the least served and floating them to the
We
top.
should distinguish
But
between not meeting the
4.1.5
FCC
count-
numbers
counts it on a,
versus underserved areas.
right.
Right, but 4.1.5, you've got, it's the highest number. So you count equally a house that's at 24 and a house that's at dial-up. They both count as one house in 4.1.5. So that biases the fund towards an upspeed fund instead of serving unserved areas. But
Okay.
I think you called
Jamie
both.
had a comment, and I'm sorry, it's Jamie and then
Yeah,
Brian.
I
and
mean,
then you.
I think we're all reusing the wrong words because we defined underserved as an area. You said it exactly right. We should be clear that, you know, we're not funding, we're not wanting these funds to go to people that are under the FCC's defined speed or the speeds that we defined in here. That's what we need to be clear on our intent with, as opposed to saying, you know, using the words underserved areas. That I'm okay with the definitions. We just need to all understand exactly what we're saying when we use the words underserved home versus an underserved area, which is defined in the definition.
Well, it's an unserved home versus an underserved area.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
Brian?
So I was just going to, don't want to complicate things, but one
Yeah.
thing that we have been pushing has been, you can put something here, that this should be directed at the density, lowest density areas, which are obviously are usually the least served, or unserved.
Right, and that's
So if you could put
inherent.
a preference,
That's inherent in here.
Yeah.
yeah, I was going to say, but you could spell it out. You
It
know,
is.
That's not
Dana
inherent.
talked about
I
what
think the
she's
opposite.
done
It is
in
in
the
the
weeding
definition of
process.
rural.
If you're going to grant these based on the most homes per dollar, you're going to send it to the highest density part of the qualified area.
Right.
Exactly the opposite of what Brian's talking
Yeah,
about.
so that's what I was trying to get to, yeah, with
Okay,
his concern.
so Alan had a comment, but then I would like to ask this because we really do need to
Right.
move on. I
Call
mean,
vote.
I think I understand your point. I think everybody does. So then the question is, do you want to make a change to 4.1.5 that will actually address that? Because it was picking the greatest number of unserved homes, which is how it reads now. The and underserved has been taken out. So it says, are most cost-effective and technically efficient that they propose to serve the highest number of unserved homes. Is there a way to fix that to address the concern you've raised? Because the way I read this is it actually sets out a lot of considerations and then expects the state to do what Minnesota did, which is maximize their fund, make sure, I mean, the states are going to be motivated to spend this in the way that is in the best interest of the state's citizens. I don't think they're going to want to refund the city of Little Rock. I mean, they're going to try to get this where it needs to go, I would assume. I mean, that's kind of how it's tried to be set up. So if there's some linguistic things you could suggest. And Alan, did you have something you wanted to say?
I was just going to say, I've heard twice now that the intent of this document was not to get to the level of detail that we're trying to get to. It's just to put the idea out there.
We can't
And
help
so I'd like to call the question.
Yeah.
Would you like to make a motion?
I make a motion, we accept Article, whatever we're on.
11. Do we have a, yes, Christopher?
Substantive question.
Yes.
So there is one difference in the funding, and I want to know if it's intentional. The original Article 11, as passed by the BDAC last meeting, optional language in Article 1 or Section 1, talks about broadband-dependent subscription services, which is a defined term under the Act. The fund here talks about, the new language talks about entities that financially benefit from access to a broadband system that is ubiquitously available, which is a different scope of funding than in what we've already passed.
Those two should be conformed. I think we agreed that we were going to be adding that second category back into the first one because it covers advertiser services.
It's fine, if that's the case, then they don't conform now.
No, they need to be, I think what we said is that we were going to conform it backwards to the original section. It's supposed to include we were going to add, I think that the two proposals were to break it out into the three different people who could be funded under the news stream, and to add that third category, which is broadband dependent services. Right? Am I using the right term?
So the thing that's in the past language is broadband-dependent subscription services, which is a defined term under our Article 1. The Article 3 on the new statute talks about entities that financially benefit from access to a broadband system that is ubiquitously available. And
Okay.
it's very different in scope.
Okay, so the way it had been modified, let me find it. What is that? 3? I can't find it.
I think, Kelly, we may have an answer for the challenge. I think. Don't quote me on it.
I'm sorry, it's taking me a second to find the new language. Oh, no. Oh, yeah, actually, guys, also you need to look at 3.5.4. It tells you the preferences, and that might also address some of Chris's concerns. Where is this? 3. It's in the, I need the new language that we just added to. There it is. Oh, yeah, that's what I'm sorry, I was in the wrong section. And we can import that 3.5 over into the new language. That was what I was looking for. It's not in the new language, but it sets forth the preferences for underserved first, underserved areas first, unserved areas first, underserved areas second. Chris, to your point, the way the language now reads in the new section, which is going to be backwards reconciled to the old section. Each communications service provider in the state will contribute to the Broadband Deployment Fund. 2, each broadband-dependent subscription service, including advertising providers in the state, will contribute to the Broadband Deployment Fund. And it may be that we need to actually make it 2, each broadband-dependent subscription service will contribute to the fund, and 3, the way it's supposed to read, and 3, entities that financially benefit from access to a broadband system that's ubiquitously available, including advertiser-based services, shall contribute into the fund.
It's weird to take a defined term and then add qualifiers to it.
I know, I'm changing, I mean, it was misscribed.
My understanding is there was a working group that broadband description, whatever services was the result of a compromise, and I want to make sure that we respect that process.
Yes. First of all, that working group wanted advertisers in there. I don't know at what point in time it was removed, but I believe it was removed, honestly, on the objection that Karen raised, which is we can't tell the state how to tax it. That was not something that most people in that working group agreed with, and it's been in and out in different times, and I'm not sure whether it got removed I'm not sure how it got removed from the definition, but if it isn't in there, then I would make a friendly amendment that it be put back in, because I believe that advertiser services are part of this picture.
So Elizabeth, can I just make my point just maybe more clearer?
Mm-hmm.
My concern is that we are talking about communication service providers, and what we're looking at are edge providers, and they're not the same.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's the problem.
That's intentional, isn't it?
Right, so if we're looking, but we don't have language in there, and so we're sending this off. We don't have language in there that would include, and I don't think that we should, but that includes edge providers. So then what is this document saying?
That includes what? I'm sorry.
Edge providers. Edge providers.
I know, well, we didn't use the term edge providers, but when you start getting at subscription-based services and advertiser-based services, those are the edge providers.
Right.
And so it is talking about edge providers. And then when you have an edge provider who comes in and wants to deploy a broadband network, they can take out of this fund too. They can apply for it just like anybody else. Nobody is barred. It's not taxing the edge providers to fund the telecommunications companies. It's taxing the edge providers to fund broadband in rural America. And if they want to deploy a network, go right ahead, knock yourself out. Apply to the money. And some of them do, and some of them are. I mean, Facebook has satellites all over Africa. I mean, it just depends on where you are and what you're trying to do. So I don't think we can make an assumption they would not also apply for a grant. And I'm trying to fix this language, Chris, real quick, but there's 2 ways to solve this. One is to put the advertiser edge providers into the definition of broadband-dependent services. The other is to call them out separately as a separate line item in this. Is there a preference? Jamie? Okay. I would think the cleaner way is to put it in the definition of broadband-dependent services, but, okay.
So just editorially, or you know, we're going to take the new stuff and 451 cleanups, but, you know, looking at what you were just reading in 354, it says applicants proposing to deploy in unserved areas. I think we need to strike again, or hopefully we're striking everything that says unserved areas and saying underserved areas, but we're only funding unserved homes.
Yes.
And make that consistent through that
Yes.
whole section, right?
So, yes, we will do that.
Because it's littered through the whole thing.
Yes, we'll go back and conform it to its underserved areas and unserved homes. And we will take that priority provision out of the old language and move it into the new language, so it's clear that the preference is for unserved over underserved and underserved over served. And served doesn't get served. I mean, doesn't get money. I think it's served doesn't get served. Served is already served.
Yes.
Yes? Do I have it? Can we, Christopher, are you comfortable?
It's just, I want to make sure that that is the sense, because it's weird to me that the working group produced one language that we've now voted on, we're now backing up, and I want to make sure that this is the will of the BDAC and that's intentional.
Okay, do you want to take a vote on whether or not you want to include advertiser services in there? Because that
is the question.
I can tell you that the will of the working group and the will of the state model code working group was to have that in there. I'm not sure when it was taken out, if it was done during harmonization, but there was nothing to harmonize among this group.
So to put it in a concrete question, the question should be whether, the other way to harmonize it would be to take the existing definition of broadband-dependent subscription services and carry that into the proposed revision.
Well, that's what my proposed, okay, and maybe we should just vote on this. My proposed amendment is to broadband-dependent subscription services, to modify that to broadband-dependent services and define it to include both subscription services and advertiser-based revenue services. That's my proposed amendment.
Yeah. I just know that some people who were on the working group had told me that this was the previous language since negotiated. I was not part of that working group. I don't know. I just know that someone has told me that, and that's what's ringing a bell in the back of my head.
Then let's take a vote. Because the working group is not, I mean, we need to decide how we, I don't know if we need to have more debate on whether you include advertiser services. I think they need to be included. I think the state needs that, and they're benefiting from it, et cetera, et cetera.
We should just
But so let's just call the vote.
on that concept,
Let's
because
vote on
I
that
hate
first.
people to vote no on the entire rural thing because of that simple thing.
Right, so we need to vote whether we're going to, I don't have, oh, I do, okay, great. Sorry, this is now a one-page voting sheet, it used to be two. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. The proposed amendment is to change the definition in the definition section from broadband-dependent advertiser services to broadband services, and to amend the definition of broadband-dependent services, to amend the definition of broadband-dependent services to include both what it now includes, which is subscription-based services, and to also include advertising-based services. Good? Does everyone understand what we're voting on? Yes means you support the change. Jonathan Adelstein.
Yes.
Myself, I'm a yes. John Burchett, not here. Alan Bell.
Abstain.
What? Keith Buell.
Not my area of expertise.
Bob DeBrow.
Yes.
Doug Dimitrov.
Yes.
David Don.
Yes.
Jamie Fink.
Yes.
Michael Hain.
Yes.
Larry Hansen.
Yes.
Betsy Huber.
Yes.
Andy Huckabee.
Yes.
Mark Hudson.
Yes.
Anthony Lev.
Yes.
Dana McKenzie.
Yes.
Kelly McGriff.
Yes.
Chris Nurse.
Yes.
Brian O'Hara.
Yes.
Karen Charles Peterson.
No.
Ken Simon.
Yes.
Brent Scorup.
Abstain.
Angela Stacy.
Abstain.
Christian Stout.
Abstain.
Rick and Thacker.
Yes.
Larry Thompson.
Yes.
Christopher Yu.
Abstain.
David Young.
Yes.
Okay, so the yes have it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And I second the motion that Alan made a little while ago.
Well, we got to remake the motion. We have 20 yes, 1 no, 6 abstentions. so it carries. All right, so advertiser services are in. We have, the motion has died for want of a second. I would ask for a new motion. Oh, sorry, Michael, go ahead.
Well, I was going to second Alan's motion with the, to let the article stand as we have it presently reharmonized so that we can get on with the more challenging issues.
Okay. This wasn't challenging enough for you? This is, that's actually going to have to be the motion because Alan's motion, there's two. Alan?
Do I second Michael's motion, or correct?
Okay, please make your motion.
I move we accept this as it has been reharmonized this morning.
And,
You got
okay,
it.
so we have a motion and a second. Call the question on Article 11.
Elizabeth?
Yes.
Should I make my motion first about Article 2?
Article 2?
Yes, removing the language that caps the fees for this program.
Oh.
We never did have a vote on that. Chris and I had talked.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know about this. I apologize.
I didn't get a lot of pushback, but I want to verify to make sure either we're okay with that or have a formal vote.
I have
Do
no
we
issue
think
with
that's a
it. Do you
friendly
have an
amendment?
issue? Does anyone have an issue with that?
So, paragraph 2, the fee leveled on current providers shall not increase above 2017 assessments and may be reduced if communication services is provided through a company with physical connections to the customer's home, business, or portable service device. I'm actually saying strike this language because we don't have enough money in this program. It's actually up on the screen.
Yay!
You might want to zoom in a little bit.
Sure. So the proposal is to strike this language.
Section 2 of Article 11,
Yes.
the original.
Basically, the friendly amendment is that I don't think we want to cap the money we're putting into this program.
Oh, I actually agree that we don't want to cap the money putting in the program.
Would we all agree that's a friendly amendment?
Does anyone disagree with the idea of not capping the fees? Okay, we can accept that as a friendly amendment.
Thank you.
And I'm really sorry to be all procedural. Can you revise your motion pending, like,
Well, it's a friendly amendment. I mean,
right, but I just. With friendly amendment. Okay, you're good. I got you, and you've got a second. Right. All right, we're good. Sorry. I'm going to go now. Ready? Jonathan Adelstein.
No.
No, okay. Myself, yes. John Burchett.
I didn't do that.
Not here again. Still, I know this. Alan Bell.
yes.
Keith Buell.
No.
Bob DeBrow.
Yes.
Doug Dimitrov.
As much as I hate to say no, I have to, because I don't think we're quite there, so no.
What do you need to get us?
I just think there's been too much, I don't think we're clear enough in my mind that we've got this nailed down to a point where, that I can support it, which
Okay.
I am
David Don.
disappointed about.
I have to abstain.
Okay, Jamie Fink.
Abstain.
Okay, do we need not to call this question?
It's kind of too late, isn't it?
I guess so. Michael Hain. Michael Hain.
With the intention of moving things forward to get the details worked out in the state, I'm going to vote yes.
Okay. Larry Hansen.
Yes.
Betsy Huber.
Yes.
Andy Huckabee.
Yes.
Mark Hudson.
Yes.
Anthony Lev.
No.
Dana McKenzie.
Yes.
Kelly McGriff.
No.
Kelly. Chris Nurse.
No.
Brian O'Hara.
Yes.
Karen Charles Peterson.
No.
Ken Simon.
No.
Brent Skorup.
Abstain.
Angela Stacy.
No.
Christian Stout.
Abstain.
Rick and Thacker.
No.
Larry Thompson.
Yes.
Christopher Yu.
No.
David Young.
Yes.
Holy, okay. Carries. 12 yes, 11 no, 4 abstain. I would like to, if we have time, which we won't, I would actually like to reopen this question to see if we can get this to something that it's not such a narrow margin. I think that there are some people who might be able to vote yes if we clarified some of the outstanding issues. I don't know if some of the abstentions can move into one category or another, but with that close of a yes/no vote and 4 abstentions, I would like to consider that we may go back to this provision.
I think we're what you wish for.
I am not, I mean, I understand what the concerns are. I'm trying.
No, I'm saying that you may turn a narrow pass into a fail.
Right.
Okay, so first of all, as all of you know by my vote and by my arguments today, I completely 100% support this position, and I believe in it. And I think that if people in this group want to vote it down, then in my opinion, that is short-sighted. But at the end of the day, I have to be a steward of the process.
Yes.
So
I think with clarity of reading the language, it'll help a lot, because there were so many changes and there were so many problems. But
on a break, we will try to get the language cleared and maybe get it out to people so they can look at it. And by the end of the day, we can see if there's.
Yeah, I certainly lean the other way when I can see things clearer. So.
Okay.
Or towards yes, sorry. Just,
Well, you voted no, not abstain.
I said abstain.
Huh?
I abstained.
Oh, you abstained?
Yes.
Oh, you're right. I beg your pardon. Okay.
One other just quick thought that I would suggest is just given the short time we have and the amount of work that needs to be done, and given the comments that there's going to at least be some work of the BDAC continuing, I would really encourage some further study by folks. I don't think this is something that can be worked out in 5 or 10 minutes. I think there's a lot here, and I think it would be much better to bring back a proposal that has further vetted some of the concerns that have been expressed here today. I know a lot of work has already been done on this, so I don't mean to diminish that, but it sounds like there is at least enough concern where some additional work might be beneficial, and that might be able to get us over the hurdle.
Okay, I'm willing to entertain that. I will, however, say that this vote is interesting, and it's interesting because this language, not the new language, but the old language, which is very similar in many ways, was approved minus 2 votes. And I mean, I can tell you who they are if it mattered, 2 people who also voted no today. But only 2 votes voted against it out of Model State Code. It was unanimous in the rural subgroup, 2 votes against it in the Model State Code, and when this code was voted out for harmonization, this was not within the harmonization scope, but Bob correctly pointed out that there was no provision for states that did not already have USF, which is where the new language came from. So I'm semi-reluctant to reopen it based on what I consider new arguments against language that was already there. Most of the friendly amendments are actually conforming what Bob did with the original. And so when we get the new language, if there's a sense that that needs to happen, I'm definitely open to it. But at the same time, this has been kind of through the ringer on a number of different fronts. But yeah, and maybe the difference in this vote versus the last 3 is the new language that apparently creates some confusion.
There's just a lot of confusion, and I think a lot of us, there's a lot of changes being made very quickly to this, and I think there's just not an opportunity for us to fully think through the ramifications of all these changes.
Okay.
So that's really what I'm suggesting. Is I don't know that we can't ultimately get there. I think this is something a lot of us would like to support, but we've got to have something that it's at least able to really be well considered before we're able to vote, at least before I'm able to vote in favor of it.
Okay. Christopher, did you want to say something, or is your thing just up? Okay.
I'm sorry, no. Although, I think that is a reasonable suggestion.
Okay. I don't, yeah, oh, sorry, it is time for a break. Let's take a 10-minute break. I think. Mike, please. Okay, if everyone could.
That seems to get people's attention.
That does. I don't use my gavel enough, that's the problem.
We have an hour and 15 minutes, and some people are going to start.
Who expressed the concern? Doug, I understand that. Troy, baby, I can talk to you. Okay, so where we are right now in this whole thing is that we are supposed to end at 12:30. We really do need to continue through this process. Some people do have to fly out. I don't know if that's a lot of people, but we can stay over in this room for as long as we need to get this accomplished. So we're going to move forward. I have been asked, because of scheduling issues, let me give you a quick oversight. Where we are right now is we have to talk about, I believe we have to talk about Article 8. Or did that give, I'm so confused now. Article 8, Article 9, Article 10, 12 and 13, and then there's a friendly amendment. I think that many of these things can be knocked out relatively quickly, but I've said that before, famous last words. But I have been requested for scheduling reasons if we could go ahead and move to Article 10, which is the state franchise agreements. And I forget who was on deck to talk about Article 10.
That's me.
Oh, that's Andy. Okay, Andy.
Wait, can I ask a procedural, please?
Yep.
We were at Article 7, we were going to the manager and then coming back.
You are correct. Thank you. Is it all right if we do 13?
Perfectly, no objection.
Okay, so we'll do 10, then 13. And you're
Elizabeth, I
right.
have a quick question. So what's the plan? Are we going to work through 5, or are we going to stop at 12:30 and figure something else out?
I would,
And so,
honestly, I would like to see where we are at 12:30. It would be my preference to continue to work, but I am not the majority of the BDAC. I'm only me. So if people are needing to be places or can't, if we could at least go to 1:30, I think we could get a substantial start. It may mean that Rates and Fees does their presentation at another time, and we just continue to work through state.
okay, so I know that I can't go until 1:30. I need to leave at 12:30.
Okay.
Because of what was posted.
Right.
And I would hate to not be here. So I don't know where other people stand. I'd love to.
Okay, all right.
Chairman?
Yes.
To echo those comments, I mean, I know that there are, one person's already left due to other commitments. It was posted 12:30, travel arrangements have been made, other people have meetings on the Hill, and I would object to moving past 12:30 just because, I mean, that was the posted time, and I think this is all extremely important, and I don't think that would be fair to those of us that have to leave after the posted date to continue on, or the posted time.
Okay. Well, thank you. Then this is what we'll do. Let's see what we can get through and see where we are at 12:30. All right, Article 10.
Article 10 is the state franchise agreements. It's on page 10.
The infamous
Just needed
page
to
10.
laugh. Never gets old. You're getting too serious about things here.
As another point of clarity,
Yes.
what you see on the board is the clean accepted version. And so when somebody makes an amendment, you're looking at the red line changes.
Correct.
This is the clean version, just so and that's what we're tracking changes in. Okay?
All right. So in Article 10, we have on the red line, under
Section 2.1, we have some language struck that says, nor may any authority in the state require a fee of communication service provider above the state authorized franchise fee for the communication service authorized by the franchisee or the franchisor. I don't know what that's supposed to be. You want to get this out and just get rid of it? Okay. Okay. The next change from the harmonization group or addition, I suppose, would be on the next page. That would be 2.4. All franchise or other fees collected by the state as a result of granting a statewide communication provider franchise shall be remitted to the appropriate local governments. I can tell you, I know that was put in probably because of an email comment that I made that we're very accustomed to our state sweeping anything that goes there, and it never makes it down to a local level. And so laying this out is important to us. The next one, 2.5, granting an optional statewide franchise to the communication provider shall not abrogate any existing franchise agreement between the broadband provider and the municipality. So if the municipality already has an agreement with the provider, that agreement will stand. The second part of that says a municipality may, at its sole discretion, exempt itself from a statewide communication franchise and require a local franchise. Okay? And then lastly, where appropriate, a communication provider shall reimburse a municipality's direct and indirect costs incurred to conduct engineering and other studies to determine the feasibility and deployment of the communication provider accessing specific municipality-owned rights-of-way and infrastructures. And that's probably similar to other language that we have throughout the document. Comments?
And I'll be just really brief, but I'm very concerned about the change that allows a municipality to opt out and require a local franchise. I mean, as much as David Don loves local franchises, I haven't heard a lot of love for my membership on it, and we certainly don't want that to be required. So that's a big concern of mine. I don't know how we resolve that. Maybe David might have some ideas.
Okay, David Don has his thing up too as well.
So let me, I had the pleasure of helping draft the original and then was on the harmonization for this. And I think a lot of changes were made to critical compromises in the original working group. So some of these changes really undercut, I think, what our whole entire working group on this code was working towards, which was minimizing barriers to broadband deployment and making sure that excessive fees and costs are not imposed on broadband providers, which then are paid for by consumers and discourage consumption of broadband. There are a couple of concepts here that I don't know the harmonization group picked up, even though they were not necessarily harmonizing with any other provisions. So that not like the Muni Code has anything here. They were just decisions to change based by a working group to review the work of a previous working group, and I think go beyond the mission of the harmonization group in general. As a policy matter, I think allowing municipalities to impose additional fees seems excessive and discouraging of consumption of broadband. And especially, there are concepts here that do apply to cable companies where we are already paying franchise fees. The cable industry pays $3 billion a year in franchise fees, and these provisions would allow municipalities to impose additional fees on top of that, even though there's no new burdening of the public rights-of-way. So I had opposed some of these. And then thirdly, there were one or two things I think the harmonization group did agree on that aren't reflected in some of these edits, and we can walk through some of these as well. I have specific proposed changes I can walk through, or do we want to have some broader discussion still?
Okay, David. Young.
A couple of things. I really appreciate, David Don, you sharing your perspective. I think a lot of hard work went into this. As being a member of the harmonization group, if we missed an edit or two, it was unintentional. I would actually like to support an amendment to strike Article 10.
the entire article from this document. I think adding a layer of additional regulatory burden is not encouraging broadband deployment.
Okay. Kelly?
I think that's a terrible idea. The vote on the state franchise agreement article was near unanimous. I understand there's been an agreement made in our break to by some of the members on our committee to try to get rid of this section. I think that's a bad idea. When we first started the BDAC, our very first meeting, I talked about franchise agreements, and a lot of what I do is I meet with city attorneys and right-of-way managers in cities, city mayors, and negotiate franchise agreements in the states where franchise agreements are allowed. There are other states where we have network where there are no local franchise agreements, and based on my experience, a local franchise agreement is a very big barrier and impediment to deployment of broadband. So if I have my Unity Fiber hat on, it's a great idea for us to have franchise agreements. For example, in the Birmingham, Alabama metropolitan area, we have 48 franchise agreements. It took me 4 years to negotiate those 48 franchise agreements. We had to meet with the city attorneys, city managers, the mayors. I had to appear before city council meetings multiple times. And that's what we needed to do to build out network in Birmingham and in the metropolitan area around Birmingham because of all the different little towns and cities that make up that metropolitan area. Very similar to the Pittsburgh area where I had to do the exact same thing. And I like to travel, that's fine, no problem. But that is now as with my Unity Fiber hat on, again, that's a great thing for Unity Fiber because if Jamie is going to build network into the Birmingham area, he's 4 years behind me. So that's a great thing for me, right, if I'm Unity Fiber. But if I take off my Unity Fiber hat and put my removing barriers to broadband deployment hat on, then franchise agreements are a terrible thing because they require a lot of time to negotiate, a lot of capital because you've got to pay somebody to go to this location, get a hotel room, meet with these people, establish relationships, and that's time and money. And I mean, in the telecom industry, time and money is better spent on deploying network, right? And providing connectivity to people. So I think I get when I talk to people that are similarly situated to you, David, I get what your point is, which is you want to retain that control and that income stream to a municipality. I understand that. But if you are going to be looking at this, in my opinion, on a removing barriers level, not from a let me protect the National League of Cities position, but how do we really get rid of barriers, then my experience is, and I don't know if that's anybody else's experience who's similarly situated, but franchise agreements are a big barrier. So if let's for example now go to Georgia. So in Georgia, they have an entirely different kind of scenario where you don't really have to enter into a franchise agreement. You got to get a right-of-way management agreement, but they're really routine. They're based on population size, and you pay this, and they're based on whether you have an end-user customer in the city. So you pay this amount of money if you're building backbone, and then once you get an end-user customer, then you pay a much lower amount of money, and because you're providing service to the municipality, and it makes sense that would be that way. I think that regulatory scheme is great in Georgia. We like being in Georgia. I like it a lot better if I've got an end-user customer in the municipality. But so that's a great way to do it. Likewise in Florida, you know, you as a carrier or as a telecom provider or network provider, you pay a certain amount of money to the state, and then the state will then pay that money out to the municipality. So I see, Andy, your that initial revision, especially that comment you made about oftentimes municipalities pay money up to the state and they sweep it away and it never comes back. So I can totally get that, and I can get behind that. But this agreement that's been made in this break to ditch the entire chapter, I don't support that. I don't think that's a good idea. This was almost nearly unanimous, passed out, and you know, you're all friends, and we're going to remain friends even after if this gets struck. I get that, but just from my personal experience, when we're building network in a state that's got franchise agreements versus a state that's taken that scheme away, and from my perspective of trying to get network connectivity out to people, it's less barriers if there are not local franchise agreements. That's what I see. And if anybody else says, oh, well, it's easier to build out in a state where there are franchise agreements, okay. Well, and that is kind of that's the position I'm in now, because we have a mature network in lots of states, and I can reach out and call the city attorney in most communities in and around Milwaukee and ask how city council person's mom is doing, because I've been there, I've met with them, I've eaten at their restaurant they own, or I've been to, you know, Tampa, Florida, and you know, sat around with the city attorney in his office after a city council meeting, things of that nature. So if you've got a mature network, it's great to have a franchise agreement scheme, because it is a barrier that keeps competitors out, at least for a while, until they can get the time and the capital to come in and do everything you've done. But if you're going, okay, as a committee, guys, how do we get rid of barriers? Well, that's a big barrier. I'm just saying. That's it.
Kelly, may I respond to you? I respect what you're saying, and I appreciate that from a particular perspective, a statewide franchise might seem like lowering barriers. But if you are a startup or a small business and you're required to go to the state to get a franchise in order to serve a small town in Nebraska, that is a barrier. And that really, I think, creates an unfair playing field. So I think that we have a difference of opinion about whether or not a statewide franchise is a barrier. I believe that it is a barrier. And that if a small community decides they don't want to have any franchise and they want to just attract people to their community, they should have that right. So it's just a difference of opinion.
Well, and my only response to that is, I was a small startup. In 2001, we had no network and very little funding. We had a great idea, and we were working out of the guest room of our founder, his house. And the way we ended up being able to start building network in Florida was we had the guy who's now one of our senior VPs for finance drove to Tallahassee, filled out the application, and paid some money, and we were able to start building a network in Florida, all over Florida. So it's not a barrier. If it's done right, it's not a barrier. And I have the faith in us that we can do it right, but it's a huge barrier for us, for example, later, a couple of years down the road, to have to now commit resources of a young, struggling company, getting a little money in, building a little network, but to say, oh, well, now we got to go to this city and speak to this city council. Oh, and it was just their first reading, so we got to come back in 2 more weeks, and we got to do that. And it's a barrier. And again, just my experience, but it's a barrier.
Okay, I need Betsy, and then I think it's Christian, and then Michael, and then David. I think that's the order they went up. Oh, sorry, I did not see you, Mark. Okay. Anthony, okay. All right.
I was a township supervisor in Pennsylvania for 24 years. There were three supervisors in the township. We had 2,500 residents. In fact, my county has 73 municipalities. So in the early 2000s, we were faced with our first cell tower application, and none of us had any idea what we should be asking or concerned about with the cell tower. So from that angle, we would have welcomed a statewide franchise agreement because we didn't know what we should be looking at. We have a cable franchise agreement with Comcast that we worked on for 10 years to renew it. We continued to operate under the old agreement, but that's just ridiculous. I think the statewide franchise is very important to remove barriers, and I think, in fact, the opting out provision makes it too loose. So I would like to see it more mandatory, maybe.
Yes.
Just quickly on
Yeah.
the language here, David. So, to Betsy's point, as currently drafted, it is not a required state franchise, David. It's an option for those who maybe want to do more than one municipality from having to negotiate with hundreds of municipalities. But if, in your example of a single small business operator who wants to do some in the community and the community doesn't want to require franchises or anything, that's still an option for them. So.
Okay.
So Elizabeth, can I speak to that quickly? Because
Yeah.
it's very relevant to that. That's kind of what we do in Kansas, that we have a statewide franchise, but providers and cities, if they choose, can do a local franchise, and sometimes that happens. And so that option is always there. It's not at the sole requirement of the city or anything. It's just, it's an agreement that's worked out between the provider and the city. And so there are reasons sometimes that a provider likes to be down at a city level. But there are other times that the state might make sense as well. So in Kansas, we kind of have that hybrid model that works that way.
Christian.
Thank you, sorry.
You okay?
I have observations at a couple different levels. One, I'm sympathetic to David's observation that we want to remove unnecessary regulatory overlays. We don't want to just keep regulation. Pursuant to that, I think that the structure of this is a little odd, that we allow the states to create a potential opt into the state level franchise and then allow the municipalities to then accept from that. That seems like a strange structure to me. If the state does think that it's a valid way for broadband to be provided, that the state can then do that. So I would remove the locality exception, just because it doesn't seem to make sense in this. But I would also observe that, as we've seen here, the state franchise is not mandatory, so you still can get the localities. You can have the small providers go out and do the localities, and at the other side of it, I think it's useful to have something like this in a model code, because again, it's useful to step back and remember this isn't being passed by a legislature right here. We're recommending to state legislatures, hey, this is a way that you can think about how franchises work in your states. And as we've heard from these anecdotes, different states have different needs. So I'm from New Jersey, which is being strangled by home rule. We're a very small state, but we have hundreds of municipalities. Our legislature might look at this and say, you know what, it actually makes really good sense to have a statewide franchise because home rule strangles a lot of really good pro-social developments. Something like Nebraska, it might make less sense, depending on how the municipality structure is. So I would leave this article in here and leave it up to the state legislature to determine whether it fits the reality of their state. And again, I would remove the municipality exception just because I think it unnecessarily undermines the value that the article would have to a state legislature that enacts it.
Okay. Mark.
Before I comment on that, I just want to clarify, you're talking about section 2.5 where the municipality can opt out.
That's right.
Yeah, so I agree with that completely. I think that undermines the entire article if a municipality can simply decide to throw their hands up and say that we opt out. My comment is more from a firsthand experience as a startup deploying broadband. I would say without the state of Michigan's Uniform Franchise Act, we would have had a much harder go. Our first market that we built into got to the negotiating table, and right away we're being asked for in-kind contributions, all sorts of things that we were able to point to the statewide uniform franchise agreement and say we don't have to do this. So it shortened that whole negotiation process. We've since that time we are in the process of building in 4 more markets. Every single market we've gone to, despite the presence of a statewide franchise act, we have been asked for everything from putting in conduit for the municipality to revenue share, all above and beyond the regular franchise fees and PEG fees in the state of Michigan's Uniform Franchise Act. So I view a statewide franchise agreement as something that's very much a removal of barriers for a startup looking to deploy broadband, in our experience in the state of Michigan.
Thank you. Michael?
I certainly would like to be able to get to even a 5-minute report on our rates and fees. We may not get to that, and I don't want to drag this out, but I think I see both sides on this. I mean, local control is critical to the cities. We recognize that as we're developing this as a recommended code for states, that one size doesn't fit all. What we create here is not going to fit everywhere, and the states will change that. But it's even bigger than that. The local communities each have their own needs and their own desires. I definitely see two barriers to deployment that this could address. The first is, as Betsy pointed out, it's hard in rural areas for these smaller communities to rely on the solicitor to come up with a document and negotiate that. So if they were able to defer back to something that was already created to the state, that would be a big boon to that. But then again, as I'm sure Larry's aware, there are cities that definitely want to keep their right-of-ways clean, and they would have significantly different requirements. Now, again, this was already voted on, and as you pointed out, came out pretty well. There are significant changes that happened in the I'm going to call it an out-of-tune harmonization. So I don't know where we are with this. I do see both sides of it. We do need something, but I think it should be open to be able to rely on it if you need to, but let the individual authorities manage their own business.
Thank you. Anthony?
Yeah, just from a procedural standpoint, 2.4, 2.5, and 2.6 weren't in the municipal code, so this is brand new language. It wasn't needed to harmonize the two codes, so I don't think we should be addressing, and I think all three of these sections should be struck just from a procedural standpoint.
These sections were actually came out of the April meeting. They were, I think, from requests made by Larry Hansen, and so they were properly in harmonization. It's okay. No, it's fine. Larry?
I recall stating at our first meeting that I felt the state franchise agreement would literally undermine the fact that we had a municipal model code working group, and we spent a lot of time creating a really good code. And I will point out that municipal model code passed by unanimous vote of the working group, and it passed by unanimous vote of the BDAC. The state model code, as I recall, in the aggregate, by chapter was opposed by 30%. 30% of the votes were against it among the members themselves of that committee, so there was not even consensus on the committee. So I feel really this undermines the integrity of having a municipal model code, and without those sections, I believe there are many cities that would choose to participate in a state franchise agreement, but there are some that would not, and they should be allowed that flexibility and that freedom and that local control to do what's in the best interest of their citizens and their community, to be able to negotiate agreements that sometimes are in the best interest of all parties. So I can't support this chapter if 2.4, 5, and 6 are removed.
Okay. So we have a recommendation. Well, we have two recommendations on the table. One is to delete the last sentence of 2.5. One is to strike the entire provision. Sorry. One is to strike the entire provision. One is to delete the last sentence of 2.5. And the other is to strike all three of those provisions. I think that we probably need to take a pulse check on deleting the last sentence of 2.5, because I heard a lot of consensus on that, where the municipality can, under its own authority, opt out. If there is strong opposition, we'll take a quick vote on taking that out, and then we need to vote on the whole thing. Is anybody, Jonathan, you had your...
Procedurally, I think we should address the motions in the sequence in which they were offered, and David offered an amendment first, and I think his amendment is properly addressed first.
His amendment was to delete the whole thing, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you want to, okay, I was going to try to vote the article, but if you want to vote that way, that's cool. But that's a motion, it died for a second. You want to
I'll
remake your
second the
motion? Okay, so we have a motion from David Young to strike the entire state franchise provision, and we have a second from Chris Nurse. And we are going, so a yes vote strikes the provision, a no vote retains the provision.
The article?
The article, sorry, the entire article. This is a yes, no vote on the entire article.
But does that mean that if it carries yes,
Then we have to,
then we're done?
no, no. If it carries yes, then we have to address the motion to strike the language.
The entirety of the language is.
In other words,
No.
So my motion, and allow me to clarify.
sorry, carries no,
is-
correct.
If you are voting yes, you are voting to strike the entire section.
Right.
The entire article.
So if it carries no.
Right, if you, okay, if the vote is yes, the entire state franchise section is gone. If the vote is no, we then need to talk about this modification request. Okay, gotcha? Okay, here goes. Yes means strike, right. Jonathan Adelstein.
Yes.
Okay, I'm abstaining. John Burchett. Not here, right, sit there, he hasn't been here all day. Alan Bell.
No.
Keith Buell.
Yes.
Bob DeBrow. Gone, dang it. Okay, that's 2 absents. Here to vote for him. Doug Dimitrov.
Yes.
David Don.
No.
Jamie Fink.
No.
Michael Hain.
No.
Larry Hansen.
Yes.
Betsy Huber.
No.
Andy Huckabee.
Yes.
Mark Hudson.
No.
Anthony Lev.
Abstain.
Dana McKenzie.
Yes.
Kelly McGriff.
No.
Chris Nurse.
Yes.
Brian O'Hara.
Abstain.
Karen Charles Peterson.
Yes.
Ken Simon.
Yes.
Brent Skorup.
No.
Angela Stacy.
Yes.
Christian Stout.
No.
Rick and Thacker.
Yes.
Larry Thompson.
No.
Christopher Yu.
Abstain.
David Young.
Yes.
I don't know fast enough.
12 to 10, 3 abstentions, 2 absences. To strike.
Okay, what's next?
Okay, so we're not talking about revisiting anything on the closeness of this vote, so I think that informs previous conversations within this committee. Wait, 1, 2, okay, go ahead, I'm sorry, I need to move on. We're going to move to, so that carries, and the state franchise provision is struck from the state, model state code. I have to say that I found Christian's argument very persuasive and on the issue. State Broadband Infrastructure Manager, I've been asked to move to that. We have to resolve that before we can resolve any of the 8, 9, 10 stuff. So, yes.
In the interest of time, I move to strike that as well.
Okay. All right, any problems with, can I give everybody very briefly, and I mean very briefly, so we're moving, clarification, we are moving to Article 13, the State Broadband Manager. I'm going to give you my perspective on a little bit of history on how this got here. This came out of the Rural Working Group. The Rural Working Group recommended an advisory body or person who would advise on state broadband strategy. When it moved up to the entire model state code group, it became a cabinet level position with enforcement authority. That was not the original intent of it from the rural perspective. It was where it ended up in state model code. I would like to give Kelly a moment, if you care to, address it, and otherwise we'll address the motion. Okay, we have a motion to strike. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, so Jonathan and Chris, is that who moved to strike in a second? Okay. All right, so a yes vote is to strike. Jonathan?
Yes.
I vote yes. John Burchett's not here. Alan Bell.
Yes.
Keith Buell.
Yes.
Bob DeBrow. Gone. One of these days I'll get it together. Doug Dimitrov.
Yes.
David Don.
Yes.
Jamie Fink.
Yes.
Michael Hain.
No.
Larry Hansen.
Yes.
Betsy Huber.
No.
Andy Huckabee.
Yes.
Mark Hudson.
No.
Anthony Lev.
Yes.
Dana McKenzie.
Yes.
Kelly McGriff.
No.
Chris Nurse.
Yes.
Brian O'Hara.
Yes.
Karen Charles Peterson.
Yes.
Ken Simon.
Yes.
Brent Skorup.
Yes.
Angela Stacy.
Yes.
Christian Stout.
Yes.
Rick and Thacker.
Yes.
Larry Thompson.
Yes.
Christopher Yu.
Yes.
David Young.
Yes.
Okay, that carries, there were 4 no votes and two absences. I'm going to now move back. I believe we're on Article 8. We're going to have to strike, okay, we're 7, thank you, 7. Thank you, appreciate that. Throughout this state model code, there are references to the broadband manager. I would like to make a universal friendly amendment that broadband manager is replaced with something like state enforcement authority or something like that, because there are things within this code that have to be enforced by someone. If we're not creating the person who does that, then the state's going to have to figure out who that is. Does anyone have a problem with replacing broadband manager throughout the document where it applies to enforcement, rather than replacing it with PSC or something like that, putting in a placeholder for whatever the state says?
Yes, because that's the whole purpose of killing the bureaucracy and to replace one bureaucrat with another, to me, just.
Exactly.
It's essentially.
Does anyone have a problem with that? I have to get approval from the BDAC before we can make the conforming changes to the document.
Right.
Okay, so you want to go on Article 7?
Yes, and given the reliance of Article 7 on Article 3 and on Article 13, by the time you cut out all the pieces, my first friendly amendment would be to delete the article in toto. Which is consistent with the one we just did for the manager.
Second.
Who seconded that? Jonathan. Do we need discussion on that? I actually don't know that I agree with that personally, because I think this is addressing something different. But in the interest, I don't know that we want to, does anyone want to address that, or I'll just call it to a vote?
Somebody describe the other parts that are not related to the answer, please.
Well, if you replace.
If we get rid of it, what's left?
If you get rid of, okay, well, you mean if you get rid of the article?
No, if we get rid of the other stuff that was struck out by Article 3, what is left?
Okay, Article 3 strikes paragraph 3 and paragraph 6.
At least.
But.
And what, I mean, and I, it's Swiss cheese. By the time you take that out, there's really nothing operative worth saving.
If you replace the manager with the state agency.
I have that Article 3.
Number 5 would
Yeah,
go
we did,
away.
but this is not Article 3, this is Article 7.
5 would go away.
Number 5 would also, it's
633
got
would
the,
go away.
as well, it's got
Is the NSIR Article 3?
Yes.
Yes, 641 would go away.
You got.
Yeah.
All of 6 goes away.
You got the manager in 4.
So yeah, so what's left in the guts of this?
Hold on,
after
give me
that?
half a second.
Well, it doesn't make sense to just always say the state public utility commission instead of manager.
Right.
It's contemplated to be a specific thing.
Right.
No, it would be the state designated authority for this type of thing. It would be whoever the state.
So it's a way of getting a manager without us saying it should be a manager.
Well, no, it isn't. The state should already have somebody who does this. Like, it might be the PSC in some states, it might be the Department of Information Services in other states. There might be a technology manager or a CTO. It just depends. So in a state, the problem with the manager was it was creating a brand-new position of a new person, and many states already have somebody who does this stuff. And so this would be whoever in the state already does this stuff, and the only thing I'm looking at is whether they have anything to do after you take
you
up.
can't skip the threshold. The PUC, for example, doesn't have jurisdiction over wireless carriers, and if you, typically, if you're going to apply this to wireless carriers, you're going to have to go in and have legislation changing the jurisdiction of the PSC. I think by the time you take out Section 3 and you take out Section 6 and then Section 5 for its reliance on 3, you know, basically, and 7 has, you know, the problem with the manager, and 8 relies on 13. There's just really there's just nothing left.
Okay. Honestly, I really need to read the first paragraph of this, and we can move on. But where the creation of new infrastructure or the modification of existing infrastructure by or on behalf of any network for support infrastructure owner amounts to civil works, we can talk about that. The license to create the new infrastructure shall be conditional upon the incorporation in the new infrastructure of network support infrastructure capable of supporting components of communications networks. What this provision is intended to do is ensure that new construction will allow the deployment of communications facilities on it. If you strike this provision, there is not something in the code that does that. I just want everyone.
Fine.
I just want everyone to know that that's.
But that's not. I would disagree with that challenge, because what this does is this. If you're going to build 25 meg or faster, it creates a new additional regulatory burden if you have to go to whoever this authority is going to be, the manager or non-manager, and get a license, which you don't need to do today. You still need, we're not giving up local control. I still have to get permits or franchises. So this doesn't do anything except create an additional barrier to deployment. And the motion was made and seconded to strike Article 7. And I'd call for a vote.
Yeah, but since there was no discussion prior to the motion being made, I will allow discussion if there is appropriate discussion to be had, because there was some confusion, and I'm not going to force the committee to vote without a full discussion of the issue. But if there is no further comments and no further questions.
I have
Sorry, Doug.
So I think what you said, Elizabeth, is, this is where I'm getting confused. The way I'm reading number 1, it's an addition, the license, that means in the case of the standard situation, the local permit that's required to support the new network support infrastructure, new infrastructure rather, will require, shall be conditional upon incorporation into that new infrastructure of network support infrastructure. It's a little bit confusing, maybe duplicative, but anyway, capable of supporting components of communications networks in accordance with the MNSN issued by the manager. So I think what Chris is saying, and I think I agree with him, is that any local license that you get now needs to have an additional potential conditional set of conditions placed upon it by a state agency. And I'm not sure, based on what you said, that was what was intended.
That, Kelly, do you want to address that? Nope. All right. Then I will. I mean, I'm not. You have to leave. I'm not advocating a position, but I do think everybody needs to understand that that was in fact the intent. Because when you have new construction, whether it is a highway, when it is a civil works, whether it is a highway or an aqueduct or a tower or whatever, or a building, it should be broadband ready when constructed. It is literally a change to code, and it is intended to do exactly that. It's intended to ensure that the infrastructure we're building can support broadband.
But the civil, and that's where I think I'm confused, because that means to me that public infrastructure needs to be broadband ready.
That is what it was supposed to be.
But I don't think it says that.
It doesn't read that way.
Could that simple statement be put in a different section? I hate to do that, but that's whole
Yes.
section dedicated to that one thing seems silly.
Because I'm not sure that anybody here would object to the notion that if it's public infrastructure being installed, it needs to be broadband ready.
It can go into it could go into Article 8. We'll see what happens to that article.
What does that mean if I build a water tank?
Yeah, I would object to it as an unfunded mandate. It should not only apply to authorities.
Oh, I don't think we were saying it only applied to authorities.
Well, who does it apply to? I mean, the Civil Works list
no,
seem to be roads and bridges and stuff.
That was network support infrastructure owners who are authorities. Correct. So well, that's who does government works, right?
Well, Kelly has to leave, but he's leaving now.
So you object because of the requirements on municipalities and the usurpation of municipal authority?
I object because it's limited, it only applies to authorities.
Okay.
Building public works.
What does it mean if you build a water tank? What is a broadband-ready water tank?
It gets strong enough to put an antenna on top and a conduit up to the top to run it there.
Yeah, that is what it means. Christopher, did you want to?
I misunderstood the article, so that worries me. I thought it was about civil works generally, not just public civil works. When I read the article, I assumed that meant people who are building new infrastructure have to
It
do
is-
curb cuts and all these other, you know.
Yeah, I'm not sure where the idea is that it's only an authority. It is civil works generally. It's not just against an authority.
So what I understand Chris to be saying is this is handled now through individual licensing with municipalities who can require additional requirements. So the question is, basically, where does this reside? Does it reside at the city level or the state level? I want to make sure I understand, is that the crux of what we're talking about?
Yes, because basically, yes. The crux of what we're talking about is the State Model Code Committee felt that it is most appropriate to require that new construction that qualifies as a civil work be broadband ready, because that is future forward, as opposed to leaving it up to a municipality to decide whether or not they want to require it. That it should actually be the way it is, because without it, it is being left to the municipalities to decide, and they might build a structure that isn't capable of supporting a small cell antenna, and that shouldn't happen. It should be done, and, you know, any other construction. It also applies, this is the one provision in this code that also would apply to the construction industry. So if somebody comes in and they want to build a new housing development, that housing development needs to be broadband ready. The homes need to have electrical capable of supporting broadband. The pipes need to be able to do what they need to be able to do. The rooftops need to be able to do what they need to be able to do. It creates a mandate at a state level that every new construction is broadband ready.
What does that mean? I mean, if you're going to have 5G and 200 megabit service in 24 months or whatnot, does that mean if I'm building an apartment building, I have to wire the building with Ethernet cable, or can wireless? But
that was exactly the discussion in the state model code.
Okay, right. But if there is 200 megabit wireless service available in the building from the small cells outside the building, you know, the building owner's been burdened with an unfunded mandate to wire the building with wiring that's not going to be used, increasing the cost of housing, which in a lot of places is, you know, very burdensome on the public.
Okay. Yes.
Because the definition of broadband ready is in section 8, and I would hate to slice and dice or completely cut something that we haven't actually gone into the definition that you're talking about first. So maybe we should look at 8 before we throw out 7, baby in the bathwater.
That makes sense.
I'm fine with that. You okay with that?
Sure.
Okay, Article 8. Now, guys, I have to say, there's a lot of relitigation of things that, and, you know, the horse trading to get stuff out that certain constituencies do or don't like for whatever reason, and that's okay. But we also need to be good stewards of the process that went into this document and recognize that there is a reason these are here, and that these were discussed and voted on at least twice. And so we don't need to be, I think we need to be careful about wholesale severing entire provisions of this document without a full and fair discussion of why they're even in here. Because and I would request that if you don't understand what an article is, that maybe we aren't going to get this done today, because I don't think you vote to strike something you don't understand.
Well, Madam Chairwoman, I just have to say on that point, and I think Ken brought this up earlier, I think it's very difficult to move on any of these things because of the pace at which we've tried to cover them. And I actually think the mistake we made was in April by voting this code out into the harmonization process. There were too much discussion at that session, and having to go back to video and allow additional comments really caused a lot of rework to this code that I think wasn't fairly presented to the committee, in all fairness. I just think it's an operational issue, a learning curve for us all in this work. But I think what's happened here today shows evidence of the fact that the code wasn't in the shape it needed to be to head to harmonization. Because I agree with you, we are relitigating way too much here. And I will say publicly, I was one of the votes against this entire code out of the working group. And I've had those concerns all along, and that hasn't changed. And so now we're seeing article after article stricken from it. And I think, unfortunately, this is not a knock to the people who put in good work and good faith effort. It's just a reality of business. This isn't working. And you know, for me, I almost moved to vote to just strike this code entirely. And let's spend our time on the code that did pass unanimously, that does seem to be a working model.
Well, we have several, yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, so
Article 8.
with that said, Article 8.
Yeah,
Jamie.
so a couple things from my perspective. I certainly support having statewide requirements in general, because there's a lot of areas that aren't covered by municipalities. So I'll leave it at that. It's really that simple. So I certainly don't think we should be striking things where it is important for the state, civil works, et cetera, to have some form of template to work from. That would be generally my comments here. I'll leave the details about the definitions of broadband ready to other people, but
No.
I think it's an important concept in general.
Elizabeth?
No. Yes.
I'd like to echo Angela's comments. We've now turned this into a Swiss cheese state model code. I don't know what we have left. I'm wondering if we don't, now that this committee has been extended and we've got more mandates until February, I'm wondering if we don't take it back, see if there's anything worth preserving, see what's left. I mean, it's hard to follow some of these line item deletions. Maybe we take it back, see if there's anything preserving. Maybe the state model code working group decides to propose something new for this BDAC to consider. But as it is now, it's really hard to follow what we have left and what our principles are. Everything related to work, as you know, Heather Gold put into this seems to have been sliced and diced. I can't tell where we stand left on municipal. You know, there were some good concepts. Maybe the language wasn't in there, but there were good concepts about facilities to facilitate broadband deployment, whether they're in construction or databases. All of that seems to have been eliminated. Maybe the working group needs to take it back and do some more work on it, see what's left, if anything worthwhile.
Larry?
I would support Angela and David with the caveat that if the committee is reformed, that there be some additional members appointed to it. There were no municipal members on that state model code working group.
Jamie?
Some of us were on both, but I would say that the comments that I heard, I shared some of the concerns about the speed at which we dealt with things in April. However, the comments that I heard from people and their concerns are the things that are getting popped out today. I don't think we're slicing and dicing. I think we are getting rid of things that people feel is a little bit of an overstep, as much as, I mean, there's tons of things here that are very necessary, in my opinion, that don't fall within municipal. So there are things we can learn from the municipal language potentially and apply in. That's what harmonization was supposed to be all about, and I felt that they did a good job with that. But there were still sections that people vehemently objected to. And now we're seeing that people don't like that. So I think it's one thing to say, hey, there's some problems, and we want to fix those problems, and let's strike the entire section. That's a totally different discussion.
Yeah, and I actually agree with that statement, because what we voted out in April was to move this into harmonization. What came back is this provision. People are now coming in and striking what they feel doesn't belong. And if that is the will of the BDAC to strike a provision, then that's the will of the BDAC to strike a provision. And if it's the will of the BDAC to alter a provision, that's also the will of the BDAC, or to retain. And I think that striking the entire code is not I mean, we've already voted out a bunch of it with very large margins. We've struck some things with extremely close margins, and we voted in some things with extremely close margins. And I think that we may not finish, but I'm not really open to going backwards. Karen and then Anthony.
So I'll make this very quick. Chairwoman, thank you very much for the opportunity. So I am the vice chair of the Model State Code Committee Working Group. I do agree with Angela and with David Don that we're in a pickle right now because a lot of it's being cut, and we are short on time. I am not opposed to us taking what's left back and looking at it again. But my question is, would we be taking the document the way it is today with the articles that have been struck?
I think that's the question, and let me hear Anthony's point, and then I'll come back to that.
Yeah, I agree with what's been said before. I think we've done a disservice to the process by taking something that was voted out in April and then just whacking huge portions of it. But I also agree that it may not have been ready for prime time in April. So I think that taking it back and having another look at it makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
I don't think you can reverse the vote of the BEAT Act
I
just
agree.
because somebody feels some way. I mean, the vote, the votes were taken. I won some, I lost some, but you don't get to take the issues that went the wrong way and say, I'd like to get a do-over.
Right. First of all, I happen
think we
to.
relitigated most of this code, despite the fact that that was not what we were supposed to do. Most of it was relitigated. So I think you're being really unfair.
Except that nobody provisions that were voted on at the last one that were unrelated, they were subject to harmonization, and these are not harmonization provisions.
But David, did anybody think that in April, when we voted one way or another individually, that we had no ability to change our vote today?
Yes.
Of course not.
But I
We
never
thought we could
understood.
change our votes. People are changing their votes today.
No,
Right,
wait a minute, so
if everything is on the table for
did you
changing.
had a feeling, or others, I don't mean to point out you in particular, but let me just put it this way. I did not have the understanding or ever expect that today I would have to vote effectively the same way I was voting in April, because things are
Correct.
evolving.
But Chris just said we did, and so my comment is to Chris.
No,
saying-
that isn't actually what he said. What Chris said, and I happen to agree with him, is that we just spent a half a day yesterday and 2 hours this morning making decisions as a body.
Right.
And some of those were close, and some of those were not at all close. And so that stuff's done. If we want to say at 12:20 on today that we are going to table the remainder of this code and take it back with the revisions that have already been voted in and approved, and look at that, that's a done deal. If you don't agree, I'm sorry. The vote happened, right? If you voted against it, it's not your anything we do for is not your
That's right.
opportunity to reopen stuff that was already voted, even if it was a 12-11 or a 10-12 vote. If it carried, and we're done. But going forward, before we start, personally right now, this is the first time I've felt that I personally was on top of all the changes that were being made and comfortable with them, and I knew what was happening. I am not sure that I can do that now that we've struck 13 and 3, that I can go back to 7 and 8 and 9 and feel that I understand what happened.
I agree, we should not be revisiting the votes we made today.
Right, so the votes that are done. Everybody can be happy with where we are on those votes because they're done. My proposal, and I really don't know how this is going to work because my sense of it is that the longer this drags out, the less relevant it becomes. And some of you may be happy with that, but I'm not. So I don't know how to do this. I don't know whether we can have, the commissioner sent this to harmonization. This came out of harmonization. That doesn't mean that you guys don't have an opportunity to do exactly what we're doing, and I think we have to do it. And I think it's productive, and I'm not at all frustrated that it happened, but I do think we don't have until February. We have until next month. And so I'd like to talk about, because I really don't think we want to sit around on this code forever, 1. 2, I happen to know that the FCC, the chairman's office, has been waiting for these to be voted one way or the other for a long time, and we have had a year and a half to put this together, and it's time to finish this. If we had the rest of today, I think we could probably get it done, but we don't. We have until 12:30, because the word came down from the chairman's office. If anyone objects to continuing past 12:30, we have to stop. We have an objection, therefore we are stopping. So where that puts us is, we have another meeting. Doug?
Yeah, I agree completely, and I think we don't have to feel badly that we didn't get this done today. These are hard issues. We did our best, and we're just not quite there. And I agree completely that we don't need to go back to the beginning. I think with respect to 7, with the ones you just said, you're not sure where we are.
7, 8, 9, 11, and 14 have not been discussed.
I agree. Those are the ones we need to address, because we haven't concluded the discussion, debate, and voting on them. But the only one that is maybe the hardest one is, forgetting the article that before the break, where you were uncomfortable with the closeness of it. That is a question we should probably try to decide.
Well, there are 2 articles like that, and I think that my friends on the other side of the table who voted to strike the state franchise agreement would not want to reopen that vote because it's close. So I think a vote is a vote. I mean, I don't think we can reopen votes because they're close at this point.
We're having a hard enough time getting through one vote.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we're done. So I think where we are is that David and I need to put together the clean version. I've been taking notes here, he's been taking notes there. We need to put together the clean version and get that back out to everybody. And then we need to have a meeting soon where we go over the remainder of the code and we continue to vote it out. And Paul wrote me a note that maybe we can have it by a public WebEx rather than an in-person meeting, although I like this context. Or maybe we could have it in a different place than DC and let the FCC do it by WebEx. I know it's burdensome on them for us to all be here. Larry?
I don't disagree with anything that you've said, but from a procedural Robert's Rules of Order issue, I think we have a motion and a second to remove Article 7, so we either have to vote on it, or those that made the motion and the second have to withdraw it, in my opinion.
Do you want to vote on your motion to remove Article 7, or do you want to withdraw the motion?
I think, given how much of Article 7 essentially has already been removed, there's really nothing left of it, so I would call for the vote.
What does that mean, already been removed? Have we voted to delete it already?
No, between Article 3 and Article 15, and that's what I was saying. I don't know what's left in Article 7, and until I review it, I'm not going to vote to remove it.
By the time you excise the sections in Article 7 that rely on Article 3
Okay,
or
we're just going to do it.
15.
Yes,
As a
Christopher.
matter of procedure, we only vote if the committee decides we want to vote. I mean, the only motion that's always in order is a motion to adjourn. If you want, I understand. But just because there's a motion on the table doesn't mean that we do have to vote on it eventually, but we don't have to do it right now.
So we can table the motion until the next meeting of the BDAC?
We can just not, yes.
All right, we'll do that.
So
okay?
the only other thing I wanted to say about what your characterization about the votes, and the thing that I was trying to tally, I couldn't figure out to do, to me, because of the consensus-oriented nature of this, because as Christian points out, this is a model code, I was trying to figure out which constituencies fell on which side.
I can tell you.
I know you, but in terms of understanding it, just because something passed 12 to 10, I don't think it's a victory if I discovered that, well, I don't need the details on that right now, but if big chunks or if there are uniform groups that didn't support it, it's one thing. So just because something won doesn't, to me, defeat the purpose of trying to find language that might find broader support.
I am willing to, so in the spirit of horse trading that has been happening, the 2 provisions there were several things that were close, but the 2 that have happened today were the Rural Broadband Deployment Fund and the strike of the state franchise. I am more than happy, if it is the will of this committee, to see if we can achieve a consensus that will either allow the people who voted to strike state franchise to support it, or that will allow the people who voted against the rural broadband to support it. But short of that being possible, I don't see, and it is by constituency, I can tell you right now, and it's not the same people. Actually, it is. the group of the people who voted against the rural broadband fund fell into 3 camps, and that actually could be moved one direction or the other with the proper language. I think that if that were wordsmithed, you would have a different vote. I think that the state franchise agreement, you have an agreement among enough people. I don't know if any of those votes move, but I'm willing to reopen it if that is the will of the BDAC, and I'm going to let...
See why we're spending our time on votes that are settled when we have materials to cover.
We already decided that
Well, we're reopening ourselves with more time, and I guess that's the question that Christopher's raising. Yes, Ken?
Well, I think you just made the point I was going to make, which is I think you've got 2 different proposals there that were a very close vote but got defeated or passed, as you might look at it, for very different reasons. And I think what you heard from the other members of the BDAC was that with respect to at least the rural fund, that with the appropriate wordsmithing and changes, there's a desire to try to get there, or at least enough of a desire where it's worth spending some more time on.
Yeah.
I do think there's a distinction between that and the state franchise.
There's no interest on the part of the majority of the state
Exactly.
franchise to change
So
that.
I think we should acknowledge that in terms of whatever our future approach is on these proposals.
That was the fun of, there were some votes just because they didn't understand it. There was a lot of people sitting on the sidelines.
There were enough abstentions. Actually, the difference, too, is there were enough abstentions to make a difference. I mean, I abstained on state franchise because I understand the issues on both sides, and that was a deliberate abstention, as opposed to, I don't understand what's going on here, abstention. And there is a distinction there, and that's fair. Yes?
It's clear we're not going to finish this anyway. We could try to use the last 10 minutes.
Yeah, we're doing it. We're doing it
Rates
right
and
now.
fees.
Thank you. But I do want to say what I think are the next steps. This is not, do not take this home and write it in your planner in ink, because until I talk to the FCC, we don't know this for sure. But this is what my recommendation is. The chairman sent this into a harmonization committee. That harmonization committee is made up of a balanced group of people. I think that we take the state model code back, we conform it to the changes that were made. We make the changes in it, that we see what's left of Article 7 by conforming it, and then we can decide later. That document needs to be turned around, if possible, within a week to 2 weeks, to let this committee review, and then we need to figure out how we can meet. And I really would like that to happen in April, in August, if not possible, then September. I think it needs to be sooner rather than later, and that is going to be my very strong recommendation on this. I do think that we need to give proper due. So can I think very quickly, and since we're voting on everything else, we're going to vote on this. A yes vote means that you approve tabling the code and following, and, with the votes in place, tabling the remainder of the code, making the edits, recirculating a clean version, and having another meeting. That is a yes vote.
Do you envision that means the commission can cite the articles that passed?
Anything that's passed, the commission can take. It's out. It's stare decisis. Anything done is done.
Okay.
And that's important, honestly, for me.
Right. Okay, so the ones that are done are up to the commission?
Yes, and we
other
will
ones-
we will work, except the Rural
it's the
Broadband
articles
Development
in the
Fund,
code.
that's going the way it is, but with the changes that were talked about, but we will be making additional changes to that.
Elizabeth,
And
can you
we'll do
clarify
that.
which articles have been done?
Yes, I sure can.
Thank you.
Definitions, passed. There were some changes, reverse changes to them, but those also passed. So you've got the Article 1, short title and purpose, passed. Article 2, passed. Article 3, failed, was struck. Article 4, passed. Article 5, passed. Article 6, passed. Article 7, tabled. Article 8, tabled. Article 9, tabled. Article 10, struck. Article 11, passed. Article 12, tabled. Article 13, tabled. And the Article 14 that was erroneously omitted also is being tabled. So
13 was tabled?
13 was struck, my bad. 13 was struck. So the struck provisions are 3, 13, and 10. And then the tabled provisions are 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, and 14. And everything else passed.
On getting this thing going and call
Yes.
for a voice vote? Can we just do a voice
Yeah,
vote?
I'm just going to, go. Jonathan?
Yes.
Myself, yes. John Burchett, not here. Ellen Bell?
Yes.
Keith Buell?
Yes.
Bob DeBrow? Not here. Doug Dimitrov?
Yes.
David Don?
Yes.
Jamie Fink?
Yes.
Michael Hain?
Yes.
Larry Hansen.
Yes.
Betsy Huber.
Yes.
Andy Huckabee. Mark Hudson.
Yes.
Anthony Lev.
Yes.
Dana McKenzie.
Yes.
Kelly McGriff not here. Chris Nurse.
Yes.
Brian O'Hara.
Yes, this is the table and move it to,
Yes.
yes.
Karen Charles Peterson.
What does the no vote mean?
That means that you want to vote today.
Yes.
Ken Simon.
Yes.
Brent Scorp.
Yes.
Angela Stacy.
Yes.
Christian Stout.
Yes.
Rick and Thacker. Larry Thompson.
Yes.
Christopher Yu.
Yes.
David Young.
Yes.
Okay, first unanimous vote of the morning. Moving on. Of course, we did have 3 people absent. Oh, right, that's right. Well, no, that was yesterday. I said of this morning. Yeah, the municipal model code was voted out unanimously, too. Okay. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Andy to present rates and fees.
Thank you. So the much-anticipated rates and fees report is out, and we're going to make very quick time of this. Listed on your report are the people that served on this committee, and I want to thank them for all of their work and time and patience and spirit of cooperation through this work. You'll see on page 2 a table of contents. You'll see a summary on page 3 that carries on a little bit to page 4, and then you'll get into the body of the paper. We have some key areas that I want to bring to bear here. And the first one is in the What Really Matters section, which starts on page 4 and carries on to page 5. And in particular, I want to bring forward the 7 principles that we highlighted as a group. By the way, I want to tell you that this report and the guidance that comes out of this report had a unanimous vote from the Rates and Fees Committee. And it took a lot of hard work to get there, but we're grateful for that, and I think we came up with a good piece of work. So I want to move you to the 7 principles, and I want to talk about those a little bit. I know we talked in April in brief about the 7 principles, but this was a group of principles that we unanimously pulled together. Everybody agreed with these, that these were principles that should guide the reasonable creation of rates and fees. And in fact, maybe even become a golden criteria or a litmus test that as rates and fees are developed around the country, with municipalities, with states, with providers, with whomever is involved with the FCC, that this set of principles should guide the establishment of those rates and fees. And in fact, that if people use these principles to establish rates and fees, we're going to have a better chance of having reasonable rates and fees and fairness, transparency, that the public rights of way are used for the benefit of the greater community, that they're non-discriminatory, that they're future-proof. And this is kind of a hard one, but it's an important one for us, that there's a sense of urgency. And I think that plays to what all of our goal is here, is that we rapidly get broadband out, and then that there's simplicity. And so these principles are very, very important. I don't know to what extent all of you have devoured these or looked at these or considered these, but we believe, and one of our recommendations is that the FCC and all of the entities that are involved in the setting of rates and fees or the negotiation of rates and fees use this set of criteria as their golden criteria, okay? So that's number one. Number two, we got into the methods very deeply, and this was one of the areas of concern that we had, that people were throwing terms around kind of wildly, but not defining them and not looking at the different perspectives and not doing a deep dive. And so what we did as a committee, and we spent quite a bit of time on this, we carved the primary methods, the most common methods out, and we did a background, we did definitions, we did perspectives on these. And we did perspectives from industry and perspectives from local government. The value of this is that all of a sudden these challenges or the reason why we're standing beside these now have verbiage related to them, now have narrative related to them, that we can begin to look at and appreciate. And I think that this informs the dialogue moving forward. I think hopefully it informs the commission as they begin to work on whether it's a cost-based method or a revenue-based method or a market-based method. Our next piece then, I'm going to flip you back to page 15. And this area is just called guidance, and you'll realize that the principles that I mentioned before are listed first, but then secondly, we did a simplification of categories. And this made a difference to us because it allowed us to understand that you can't just group all rates and fees in one bucket, that there are really three defined buckets that we saw. One of them are the one-time fees or the event-based fees. And we agreed as a committee that those should be cost or cost recovery based and make that recommendation to the group. The second piece then are the rental fees or rental rates actually. And so those rental rates are the rate that people would pay to attach to a pole or a structure or a building, something of that nature. And we didn't really come to a full consensus of what that ought to be in terms of how we get there. And that may be perhaps some of the work going forward that Elizabeth has mentioned. And then the last are the access rates. That what are the rates that are charged to have access to the right-of-way, and what does that look like, and how are those calculated? We put some verbiage behind that. We then end with an appendix that talks about the background, what happened here, the establishment of the BDAC, the establishment of this particular group, how the different work groups had addressed rates and fees, and all of this was used for consideration of our work. Okay?
Thank
So I want to
you.
open this up for comment or conversation.
Jonathan.
I just want to thank Andy
sorry.
for the hard work.
David.
Great effort. Just one friendly amendment I'd like to offer that is all I have. Otherwise, I strongly support this. In page 16, the last sentence of rental rates, to conform with what we did yesterday on Article 4 of the State Model Code, I want to clarify that we move public rights-of-way up from the end of the sentence to the suggested edit would be that the sentence would read as follows. The committee generally agreed that this is a cost-based model, add for the public right-of-way, but differed on what should be included in the cost, and then cross out of a public right-of-way at the end of the sentence. So just move public right-of-way up so it modifies the entire sentence.
Can we
That's-
put that language on the screen so people can see?
Language is on the screen right now.
So what,
This com-
oh,
yeah,
that computer can't edit, okay. So
but I
this,
can make the edit here and I'll have
so
it.
the sentence would read, the committee generally agreed that this is a cost-based model, comma, for the public right-of-way, comma, but differed, correct?
Yeah, you don't need the commas necessarily.
Okay. All right. I would like,
Madam Chair,
yes, sorry, I didn't see you.
I would like to actually recommend that we remove the last sentence of that paragraph on rental rates. It uses the term generally agreed. There was only one recommendation from this committee, and that was that one-time fees be cost-based, and general agreement is general disagreement. So I'm recommending the last sentence be struck from the paragraph to make it clear that there is no recommendation.
Okay. Angela, are you actually saying something, or?
I have a question.
Yeah.
It's on the footnote on page 3 that
Mhm.
footnotes the data collection. I didn't want to breeze by that. So Christopher, can you explain what happened there?
Maybe. So the answer is, I think the footnote explains. all right, the reason we're all chuckling is this has been a source of extended negotiation, extended discussion in the committee and with the FCC and with General Counsel's office.
Right.
And because we have to be careful about what we're saying, I'm reluctant to expand too much beyond it. The core concern is to the extent to which something is protected by a non-disclosure agreement, other people cannot probe what it means to the extent is often permitted in typical administrative procedures. And there is a hope or some discussion about ways to cure this process, to go forward with some possible further analysis of the data. But this document, as it stands, did not use the data as a principal basis for any of its recommendations.
So to cure that for future work of the Rates and Fees Committee, which, given we're at 12:30, will no doubt have to happen.
Larry.
Can we not use the Freedom of Information Act and call upon public records for agreements that may be in place that don't include non-disclosure competitive information to use as a data source?
I am reluctant to go into detail about that now because there's an answer, but it's so technical, I'll have to be careful. But yes, there's a question about the interaction between FOIA and NDA.
Okay.
And to the extent to which this data were part of a formal action by the FCC, you'll run across some complications. And part of what we're doing is dealing with that.
So we're at time, and I really do appreciate, and I'm happy to take it offline and talk to you about it, but I think we can't really get into it further right now. Okay.
Madam Chair, how are we voting to amend a committee report? The committee.
There is a, okay. First of all, I take your point. I think that
The committee was summarizing their findings. How can
this
we
committee was summarizing their finding. I don't really have a problem with Jonathan's amendment because it basically just it's an administrative clarification of a sentence that was kind of poorly written. No offense to the committee. But striking it, I think that's a good question. So we need to, this was intended to refer, we were talking about the rights of way when we had this. This was at the in-person meeting, and what happened at the in-person meeting is we went around the table and said, are you in general agreement with this? Just to remind you, Larry. And pretty much everyone was like, yeah, I think so, pending what's involved in costs. So I feel that the sentence is, in fact, accurate of what happened, and so.
As drafted, it's accurate?
No, as revised, it's accurate. Because we were talking about the right of way, we weren't talking about other things outside. We were talking about, specifically talking about polls.
We talked about.
So maybe shouldn't the committee take this up?
Yeah, and guys, it can, and the reason it can be amended is because if we adopt this, this goes as the final document to the FCC. So if it's not accurate or otherwise wrong, then we can.
But how can I vote on what the committee debated?
Okay, what you're actually voting on, and maybe I should have clarified this, what you will be asked to vote on is to approve this as the report and recommendation of the Rates and Fees Committee.
Right.
So this is because, it's sort of like voting on competitive access, where they were asked to change things as a matter of friendly amendment, and then that became the final document that the FCC then used in part to get to where they are in some of the stuff that they're doing. So that's what's going to happen with this document. This document will inform FCC decisions once this committee votes it out. So we can, in fact, make alterations to it.
I make a motion to adjourn. There are folks who aren't here, and it's after 12:30.
I second that.
I second that.
I don't see how this body can do work now at this hour with important people not here, and it's after 12:30.
We have a motion on the floor. I was actually trying to get your attention to second Jonathan's motion.
Oh,
There's
yeah,
already
sorry.
been,
We have
so-
to clear the motion, and then we can take your motion up.
Yes.
Jonathan's motion, what's your motion to approve the code?
No, I was going to second Jonathan's motion and ask that we.
To add the language.
Correct.
Okay, we're going to have to do that vote very quickly. Okay, so Karen had an objection to leaving it, to leaving it 12, to going past 12:30. If you,
Kelly did as well.
Yeah, I don't think I was the only one.
oh, Kelly's objection, he left at 11:55. I'm sorry, I think that's out of order. I mean,
Does that mean his
Kelly already
objection
made.
went past 12:30?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Kelly's not here either way. He left at noon, not 12:30. So, but I do appreciate that he did object, and we're not going to continue past 12:30. We already passed 12:30, but we do have to clear the motion.
So we can take the vote?
You want to table the motion? Okay. There's a request to table the motion.
No, I think let's take the vote on Jonathan's motion.
Okay, let's do it. We can do it super fast. All right, Jonathan.
Yes.
I say yes. John Burchett. Not here. I keep doing that. Alan Bell.
Yes.
Keith Buell.
Yes.
Bob DeBrow. Not here. Keep doing that. Doug.
Yes.
This is just on the change, not the document. David Don.
No?
Jamie Fink.
Yes.
Michael Hain.
Yes.
Larry Hansen.
No.
Yes.
Oh, no, you're Larry Thompson. Betsy Huber.
Yes.
Andy Huckabee.
Yes.
Mark Hudson.
Yes.
Anthony Lev.
No.
Dana McKenzie. Okay. Kelly McGriff, not here. Chris Nurse.
Yes.
Brian O'Hara.
Yes.
Karen Charles Peterson. Karen,
I know, sorry.
this is just to change the language, not to approve the thing.
Right, right, but it does change.
Clarify.
Yes.
Okay.
It just changed.
Ken Simon.
Yes.
Brent Scorup.
Yes.
Angela Stacy.
No.
Christian Stout.
Abstain.
Rick and Thacker.
Yes.
Larry Thompson. That's that vote. No, that's, he gave his proxy to Michael. He voted yes. Christopher Yu.
Yes.
David Young.
Yes.
Okay. So that motion carries. We have a motion to adjourn, which effectively tables the vote on the rates and fees work
There's
until,
another motion.
I'd made a motion to remove that sentence.
sorry, was that motion seconded? Do we have a second on removing this? Okay, Karen?
What sentence are we removing?
That entire sentence that we just voted to
The
modify?
last sentence under rental rates, the committee generally agreed that this is a cost-based model, but different on what should be included in the cost of the public right-of-way. The committee only made one recommendation.
Paul, can you clarify that we're allowed to conduct business
Well, people
after
can-
12:30?
We can't. We've got to stop.
So are we
And I would,
conducting
here's what I would
business?
like to
I made
request.
the motion prior to 12:30.
That's true, you did. It was it was not seconded, and okay, I'm not going to get all parliamentary, because honestly, I would continue, so I'm the wrong person to ask, but I will tell you this. Jonathan's motion was made and seconded. That needed to be voted on before another motion
agree.
would be in order. So we will take your motion up first when we revisit this document at the next time we are together.
That's the right thing to do. It's not adopting it anyway.
Because the document's not approved, the BDAC hasn't voted on it. This is not right now. Huh?
Seconded?
There was a motion to adjourn, and there was a second. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.